Lightning split the Arizona sky, illuminating three men circling their prey like wolves. In the mud-soaked street of Copper Springs, an elderly Apache man knelt, blood streaming from his temple. Despite his predicament, dignity emanated from him like heat from fire. "Teach the savage what happens when they come to white towns," growled the largest attacker, delivering a vicious kick that the old man somehow absorbed without a sound. Thunder crashed overhead as the saloon doors swung open. A lone figure stepped into the downpour, his movements deliberate, almost predatory. Mason Reed's hand hovered near his holster, but it was the intensity in his eyes, deep set beneath the brim of a weather-beaten hat, that gave the drunken men pause. "That's enough," Mason called, his voice cutting through the storm. The leader spat in the mud. "Mind your business, stranger. Just an engine, getting what's due." Something flickered across Mason's face. Not quite anger, something older and deeper. His Cherokee grandmother had died with that same phrase ringing in her ears. No one in Copper Springs knew about his mixed blood. His features favored his white father enough that he'd spent his life in the shadowed borderland between two worlds belonging fully to neither. I said, "That's enough." Mason advanced, rainwater streaming off his duster. The first attacker reached for his gun with drunken confidence. Mason moved with fluid precision, as if the violence was a dance his body remembered without thought. His open palm connected with the man's throat. As the brute staggered back, gasping, Mason's boot shattered the second man's knee. The third attacker's knife slashed empty air as Mason caught his wrist, using the man's momentum to drive him face first into the livery wall with bone-breaking force. In seconds, all three lay incapacitated in the mud. Mason hadn't drawn his weapon once. Lightning flashed again as he knelt beside the injured Apache. "Can you stand?" he asked, his voice gentler than before. The old man's eyes, dark and penetrating, studied Mason with unnerving intensity. "Yes," he said in perfect English, then winced. "Perhaps with help." "Name's Mason Reed," he said, supporting the elders' weight as they moved away from the groaning attackers. "I am Cheon," the old man replied, then voice dropping to a whisper. "You have marked yourself this night, Mason Reed. They will come for you now." Mason frowned. "Those three, I'm not worried. Not them." Sitan's gaze shifted to the hills beyond town. "Others, those who hunt my people." Mason followed his gaze and caught a silhouette on the ridge, a mounted figure watching them through the storm. When lightning flashed again, the figure had vanished. "My cabin's not far," Mason said, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. "We'll tend those wounds there." As they left town, Mason felt something stir inside him, an awareness that had been dormant for years. The part of him that was his grandmother's grandson, recognizing a turning point when it presented itself. Underscore, 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 underscore. The cabin fire cast dancing shadows as Mason cleaned Saitan's wounds. The old man sat quietly observing Mason's methodical movements. "You have done this before," Chaitan noted. "Army scout patched up enough wounds." Mason's tone was matter-of-fact, but his hands betrayed a gentleness at odds with the violence they displayed earlier. "The war between the whites," Chaitan said. "The Apache have their own wars." His eyes narrowed slightly. "You understand this better than most white men." Mason's hands stilled momentarily. The perceptiveness of the old man was unsettling. "My grandmother was Cherokee," He admitted the words feeling strange on his tongue after years of silence on the matter didn't do her much good in the end. Citan nodded slowly as if confirming a suspicion. The blood remembers even when the mind tries to forget. Mason said nothing, finishing his ministrations in silence before preparing a simple meal. As they ate, Citan studied him with that same penetrating gaze. "You carry your ghosts close, Mason Reed," the old man observed. "They weigh on your spirit." Mason's jaw tightened. "We all have our burdens. Yes, but you carry yours differently. Like a man with one foot in the grave and one searching for solid ground." Citan sat down his empty plate. "Why did you help me tonight?" The question hung in the air. Mason considered his usual deflection but found himself unable to lie to those ancient eyes. "Seen enough men beaten while others stand by," he finally said. "Done enough standing by myself." Citan nodded, reaching into a small pouch at his waist. "For your kindness, I give you this." He held out a necklace, a leather cord from which hung a turquoise stone, set in silver, etched with the symbol of an eagle in flight. When Mason hesitated, Citan added, "Refusal would dishonor me." Mason accepted the gift, surprised at the warmth of the stone against his palm. As he slipped it over his head, a strange sensation passed through him, like distant thunder felt rather than heard. "The sacred eagle will watch over you," Citan said, his voice taking on a rhythmic quality. "It sees the path when eyes are blind." Later, as Citan slept in Mason's bed, the scout settled by the fire, his hand occasionally rising to touch the turquoise stone. Outside, the storm raged on, but within Mason, a different kind of tempest was brewing, memories long suppressed, stirring like snakes from winter sleep. Sleep came fitfully, and when it did, Mason dreamed. He stood in an Apache village engulfed in flames. Screams filled the air as blue-coated soldiers fired indiscriminately. Mason tried to move to help, but found himself rooted in place, forced to watch the slaughter unfold. Through the smoke appeared an elderly woman, silver hair adorned with feathers, face lined with wisdom and sorrow. Unlike the terrified villagers, she walked calmly through chaos directly toward Mason. Her dark eyes bored into his soul. "Find me," she commanded, her voice clear above the screams. "Find me before the full moon rises." She pressed her palm against his chest, where the turquoise stone lay. Pain bloomed beneath her touch, not sharp, but deep and insistent. "The wheel turns," she said. "You have been chosen. Mason Reed." Blood calls to blood. Flames surged around them, engulfing everything. Mason jolted awake, sweat-soaked. Despite the chill, dawn light filtered through the window, revealing an empty bed. Citan was gone. Outside, Mason found no tracks in the mud. Impossible. After the night's deluge, it was as if the old man had simply vanished into the morning mist, leaving only the turquoise stone as proof he'd ever existed. The dream clung to Mason like smoke to clothing. Checking his calendar, he noted 3 days until the full moon. Coincidence, perhaps, but his grandmother had taught him young that coincidences were often the spirit's way of remaining anonymous. Decision made, Mason saddled his horse. If answers existed, they'd be found in town first, then beyond. The turquoise stone pulsed warm against his skin as he rode toward Copper Springs, unaware that he was being watched by eyes that recognized the sacred eagle he now wore. The rusty-nailed saloon hummed with morning activity, mostly miners nursing hangovers and a few determined gamblers continuing games from the night before. Mason nursed his coffee, listening more than speaking, gathering information like kindling for a fire. "Army's been gathering at Bear Creek for days." A grizzled prospector was saying, "Word is they're planning a raid on one of them Apache camps." "About time," his companion replied. Can't have savages running free, taking what they want. Mason's grip tightened on his cup, the familiar anger rising. 20 years trying to pass is white, and still comments like these stirred something primal in him. This about that Apache you helped last night. The bartender's voice was low as he wiped the counter near Mason. What do you know about Bear Creek? Mason asked. The bartender leaned closer. Army's after someone specific, an old medicine woman. Some say she's stirring up trouble. Others that she's got knowledge they want. He shrugged. Either way, that new lieutenant's got orders to bring her in. Lieutenant Harrington, I think his name is. Ambitious type, wants to make captain before year's end. The name struck Mason like a physical blow. Luke Harrington. Not just any officer. His former friend, his brother in arms through 3 years of frontier warfare. The man who had saved Mason's life at Yellow Ridge. The man whose orders Mason had refused at Ash Creek. As if summoned by his thoughts, the saloon door swung open and a shaft of sunlight momentarily blinded him. When his vision cleared, Mason found himself face to face with a tall man in a cavalry officer's uniform, lieutenant's bars gleaming on his shoulders. Luke Harrington hadn't changed much in 5 years. A new scar along his jawline, a hardness around his eyes that hadn't been there before, but still the same confident bearing that had made men follow him into battle. Harrington froze mid-step, recognition washing over his features. "Mason Reed," he said, voice caught between disbelief and something darker. "They told me you were dead." The saloon fell silent, patrons sensing the tension crackling between the two men. "Sorry to disappoint," Mason replied evenly. Harrington's hand didn't move toward his sidearm, but his stance shifted subtly. "What are you doing in Copper Springs, just passing through?" Mason kept his voice neutral, though his mind raced with implications. If Harrington was leading the raid on Bear Creek, a humorless smile spread across Harrington's face. "You should keep passing, Mason. This isn't a healthy place for a man with your history." Mason stood tossing a coin onto the bar. "I'll keep that in mind." As he moved to leave, Harrington's hand shot out, gripping Mason's arm. He leaned in close, his voice a harsh whisper. "You should have stayed in your grave, Mason." Their eyes evoked a silent communication filled with years of shared history, betrayal, and blood. "Never found one that would take me," Mason replied quietly. Harrington's grip tightened momentarily before releasing. "Don't interfere in official Army business. For old time's sake, that's the only warning you get." Mason nodded once and walked out, feeling Harrington's gaze burning into his back. Outside, he mounted his horse and rode not toward his cabin, but south toward Bear Creek. Whatever was happening there, he needed to see for himself. The turquoise stone seemed to pulse with approval against his chest. UNC High on a ridge overlooking Bear Creek Valley, Mason surveyed the scene through his field glass. The Apache encampment, perhaps 20 dwellings nestled against a red rock cliff, bustled with ordinary activity. Women grinding corn, children playing, men repairing tools. A normal day with no awareness of the threat gathering just beyond their sight. Because on the next ridge over, hidden from the Apache but visible to Mason Harrington's cavalry unit prepared for attack. 40 men at least checking weapons, receiving final instructions. The raid would come soon, likely at dusk. As Mason watched, movement at the edge of the Apache camp caught his attention. A solitary figure, an elderly woman, walked slowly toward a cottonwood tree standing apart from the dwellings. There was purpose in her movements, a ritual quality that spoke of ceremony rather than casual stroll. Mason adjusted his field glass for a closer look. His breath caught. It was her, the woman from his dream. The same silver hair adorned with feathers, the same lined face conveying both ancient wisdom and timeless strength. As she settled beneath the cottonwood, and arranged objects before her, the turquoise against Mason's chest grew hot. This was no coincidence. His decision crystallized as two riders broke away from Harrington's unit, heading toward the camp. Scouts probably sent to assess positions before the main attack. Mason urged his horse down the ridge, staying low and using terrain for cover. He was halfway down when gunshots shattered the valley's peace. Too soon. Something had gone wrong. Spurring to a gallop, Mason abandoned stealth for speed. As he rounded the ridge's base, he saw the two scouts had reached the old woman. One held her roughly by the arm, while the other kept any would-be rescuers at bay with his rifle. They were taking her specifically before the main attack. Mason fired a warning shot as he approached. "Let her go! U.S. Army, stand down!" one scout shouted, turning his rifle on Mason. Mason didn't slow. The scout fired the bullet whistling past his head. Mason's return shot caught the man's arm, causing him to drop his weapon with a cry. The second scout pushed the old woman down and drew his revolver. Mason leapt from his still-moving horse, rolling as he hit the ground and coming up with his own weapon drawn. What followed wasn't the shootout the scout expected. Mason closed the distance in 3 rapid strides, caught the man's gun hand before he could fire, and rendered him unconscious with a single blow from his revolver butt. Turning quickly, he kicked the rifle from the first scout's one-handed grasp and followed with a precise strike to the temple that dropped him beside his companion. Only then did Mason turn to the old woman, who observed him with calm assessment, utterly at odds with the violence just witnessed. "Are you hurt?" he asked, extending a hand. She ignored his offer, rising with surprising grace, her dark eyes fixed on the turquoise stone visible at Mason's collar. "You wear the sacred eagle," she said in perfect English. "You are the one from my vision." Before Mason could respond, the air around them seemed to shimmer, and for a brief moment he saw not just the old woman standing before him, but something else superimposed over her. A luminous outline suggesting great power contained within her frail form. He blinked, and the vision vanished, leaving only the elderly woman studying him intently. Shouts erupted from the Apache camp as several men ran toward them. Simultaneously, cavalry bugles sounded, signaling Harrington had seen the confrontation and was mobilizing his troops. "We need to go," Mason urged. "Now." The old woman shook her head. "First, you must know I am a pony." She pulled aside her shawl to reveal an ugly wound on her side, not from a bullet or knife, but something else. The skin around it had taken on an unnatural bluish tint that spread in web-like patterns. "Poison," she explained calmly. "Slow acting. 7 days remain to me, perhaps less. The one who leads the blue coat seeks what I protect." Mason stared at the wound. Harrington did this. "The one whose soul you once knew," she confirmed. "But now is not the time for explanations." A movement caught Mason's eyes, something impossibly fast. Suddenly, a young Apache woman stood beside them, materializing like a spirit from the very air. Her long black hair bore a single eagle feather, and the bow in her hands was drawn, arrow pointed unerringly at Mason's heart. "Nita," a pony said sharply, "lower your weapon. He is not our enemy." "He is one of them," Nita replied in Apache, her voice cold with hatred. "No," a pony said firmly, switching to English. "He is the one from my vision, the savior who wears the sacred eagle." Nita's eyes flickered to the turquoise at Mason's neck, but her bow remained steady. "Saitan's amulet. Did you steal it from him, white man?" "He gave it to me," Mason replied. "Last night in Copper Springs." Something shifted in Nitika's expression. "Chaitan is alive. He was when he left my cabin this morning." The cavalry bugle sounded again, much closer now. "Decide quickly, child. a pony told Nitika. "Trust my vision or trust your anger. We have no time for both." For a moment, Mason thought the young woman would lose her arrow regardless. Then, with fluid grace, she lowered the bow. "If you betray us," she promised, her English as perfect as a pony's, "I will kill you slowly." "Fair enough." Mason nodded, respect coloring his tone. Harrington's cavalry was cresting the nearest ridge, the lieutenant himself at the vanguard. "We need to move," Mason urged. "Is there somewhere defensible?" Nita pointed to a narrow gap in the cliff face that Mason would have missed entirely if not shown. "This way." Mason helped a pony onto his horse, then mounted behind her. As Nita led them at a run toward the gap, Harrington's voice rang out across the valley. "Mason Reed, stand down and surrender the Apache woman." Mason turned in the saddle. Even at this distance, the fury in Harrington's posture was evident. "Let me talk to him," Mason told Nitika. "Get a pony to safety. I'll catch up." Nita's expression made it clear she expected never to see him again. "The North Passage," she said reluctantly. "Follow it until it splits. Then take the right fork. I will leave signs." As they disappeared into the gap, Mason turned to face his former friend. A strange calm settled over him, the battle clarity he'd known in his scouting days. Harrington urged his horse forward, separating from his men. He stopped 20 yards away, close enough to speak without shouting far enough to draw if needed. "You're interfering in official army business," he called. "That's a hanging offense these days. Is poisoning old women official business now?" Luke Mason replied evenly. Surprise flickered across Harrington's face before hardening again. "You don't understand what's happening here. Then, and explain it to me." "I can't." Something like regret shadowed Harrington's features. "For God's sake, Mason, we were friends once. I saved your life at Yellow Ridge. You owe me. And I saved yours at Blackwater," Mason countered. "Debts paid." Harrington's jaw tightened. "Last chance. Stand aside. You know I can't do that." Time stretched between them, a moment weighted by shared history and the blood they'd both spilled. Then Harrington's hand dropped to his revolver. "Pity," he said. "I really thought you were dead." The gunshot cracked across the valley. Mason had already moved, diving for boulder cover as bullets kicked up dust around him. He returned fire, not aiming to kill, but to drive Harrington back. More riders advanced, rifles ready. A bullet grazed Mason's shoulder, burning pain followed by warmth that told him he was bleeding. He fired twice more, then sprinted for the gap where Nitika and a pony had disappeared. Bullets chipped stone around him as he ran, but none found their mark. The passage twisted sharply, just inside the entrance, providing immediate cover from gunfire. Mason pressed on, following the winding path deeper into the red rock labyrinth. Behind him, Harrington ordered men to follow on foot. Mason had a lead, but he was wounded in unfamiliar territory and outnumbered. The passage climbed, switchbacking up the cliff face. Mason's wounded shoulder throbbed with each heartbeat. He paused, listening for pursuit. The sounds of men picking their way through rocks echoed from below, but still some distance back. Continuing upward, Mason reached a fork. True to her word, Nitika had left a sign, an eagle feather wedged into a crack pointing right. Mason followed the path, now descending into shadow. Light faded as dusk approached. Soon, moving through these canyons would be nearly impossible without light. A disadvantage for both him and his pursuers. Mason pressed on, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter behind him. Finally, the passage opened onto a small hidden valley nestled between towering cliffs. A stream trickled down one rock face, feeding a small pool surrounded by greenery. An oasis hidden in the harsh landscape. Near the pool, the entrance to a cave was visible. Mason approached cautiously. Nita a pony. Nitika emerged from the cave, bow ready, but not drawn. "You survived," she said, mild surprise in her tone. "Disappointed?" Mason asked dryly. The ghost of a smile touched her lips before vanishing. "Not yet. Come, grandmother needs help." Inside the cave, Mason found a pony lying on a bed of blankets near a small fire. The bluish tint around her wound had spread further now, reaching her collarbone. Her breathing was shallow but steady, her eyes clear as they tracked his approach. "You chose to stay," she observed, "despite your friend Mason knelt beside her. Harrington stopped being my friend a long time ago." "No," a pony said, her voice soft but certain. "The bond remains twisted, though it has become. That is why this pains you." Before Mason could respond, Nitika knelt on a pony's other side with a small clay pot containing a pungent paste. "I have prepared the medicine, grandmother." The scent triggered something in Mason, a memory of his Cherokee grandmother preparing similar remedies, singing softly as she worked. For a moment, he was a child again, watching ancient hands mix healing with prayer. A pony nodded. "It will slow the poison, but not stop it." She turned to Mason. "Now, Nita will tend your wound, and you will tell us why the sacred eagle brought you to us." Mason submitted to Nitika's administrations, wincing, as she cleaned his bullet graze with an herbal solution that stung fiercely. As she worked, he recounted meeting Chetan, the dream that followed, and his discovery of Harrington's raid. When he finished, Nitka was binding his shoulder with strips of clean cloth, her touch clinical but not rough. A pony had listened without interruption, her expression thoughtful. "Highton has always seen more clearly than most," she said finally. "He recognized your spirit." "I'm just a man who happened to be in the right place," Mason insisted. "There are no coincidences in this world." "Mason Reed," a pony replied. "Only paths we have not yet understood." She shifted, grimacing slightly. "The poison in my veins was meant to be slow, to give me time to reveal what they seek." "And what is that?" Mason asked. Aoni and Nida exchanged a look, a silent communication passing between them. It was Nadita who answered. "My grandmother is the last true medicine woman of our band. She holds knowledge passed down for hundreds of years, healing ways, sacred site ceremonies that connect us to the spirit world." Her voice held both pride and worry. "The blue coats believe she knows the location of something they want very badly." "Gold," Mason guessed. "Knowledge is the true gold," a pony said. "But yes, they seek the yellow metal as well. Their leader, the one you call Harrington, believes I will lead them to it before I die." Mason considered this. "Why not just torture the information out of you?" Nitka tensed at his blunt question, but a pony remained calm. "Because what they seek is protected by more than just secrecy," the old woman explained. "It requires willing passage. Force would render it worthless." And it sounded like superstition to Mason, but he'd seen enough of the world to know belief itself held power. If Harrington believed it, that was reason enough for his actions. "So what now?" he asked. "Harrington won't give up. He'll comb these canyons until he finds us. Now you must choose." "A pony," said her dark eyes holding his with an intensity that reminded him of his dream. "You may leave us, follow the eastern passage out of this valley, and be miles away by morning. Or you may stay and help us reach the Canyon of Shadows, where the cure for this poison may be found." "Along with whatever Harrington is seeking?" Mason asked skeptically. "The two are not unrelated," a pony admitted. "But time grows short. The poison reaches toward my heart, and the full moon comes in 3 days." The full moon, just as in his dream. Mason touched the turquoise stone still warm against his skin. "Why should I trust you?" he asked, directing the question at both women.
For all I know, you're using me just like Harrington is using you. Trust is earned, not given, Nitika said sharply.
"As is loyalty. You are free to go." Mason Reed, a pony, said more gently. "The vision brought you to us, but your path remains your own to choose." Mason studied them, the dying elder, and the fierce young woman who protected her. He thought of Harrington, and whatever scheme had driven him to such extremes. He thought of Satan, and the dream that had led him here. Mostly, he thought of all the times he had walked away when staying might have made a difference. "I'll help you reach the Canyon of Shadows," he said finally. "After that, we'll see." Relief flickered across Nita's face before her stoic mask returned. A pony simply nodded, as if she had known his answer all along. The old woman reached out, taking Mason's hand in her own papery one. At her touch, the cave around them seemed to fade momentarily. Mason blinked suddenly, seeing not the stone walls, but a vast landscape of stars with luminous paths connecting them like rivers of light. "Your grandmother's people understood," a pony whispered, though her lips didn't move. "The world you see is only the shadow of what truly exists." Then the vision vanished, and they were back in the cave. A pony looking at him with knowing eyes. Had he imagined it rest now? The old woman said aloud. "Tomorrow, our journey truly begins." As Mason settled on the far side of the cave, spreading his bedroll on the stone floor, he couldn't shake the sensation that he had just stepped onto a path that would change him in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Outside, the first stars appeared in the desert sky, watching like distant, indifferent eyes over the drama unfolding beneath them. Dawn painted the hidden valley in hues of gold and amber. Mason stood at the cave entrance, watching as Nitika performed what appeared to be a morning ritual by the pool. Her movements were both graceful and precise, accompanied by softly chanted words. As she raised her arms toward the rising sun, a hawk circled overhead, seeming to respond to her call. The sight stirred something in Mason memories of his grandmother's dawn prayers, the way she had tried to teach him the old ways before his father forbade it. He had been 7 when he last witnessed such ceremonies. Yet something in him recognized the sacred patterns Nitika traced in the air. Inside the cave, a pony stirred from fitful sleep. The blue tint of poison had spread further overnight now, reaching the base of her throat. Despite this, her eyes remained clear and alert as Mason approached. "The soldiers have not given up," she observed, reading his expression. "No," Mason confirmed, kneeling beside her. "We should move soon." A pony nodded. "Help me up. I must prepare." Mason supported her as she rose, concerned by how her body trembled with the effort. She was strong-willed, but the poison was taking its toll more rapidly than she admitted. Nita returned from her morning ritual, her hair damp from the pool. She assessed her grandmother with a healer's eye. "The blue sickness spreads faster," she said, not hiding her worry. "All the more reason to reach the canyon quickly," a pony replied. While Nita prepared a small breakfast of dried meat and berries, Mason studied the rough map she had scratched in the dirt the night before. The route to the Canyon of Shadows was arduous through twisting ravines across exposed plateaus, and finally into territory controlled by a group Nitika had described only as the Devil Men. These Devil Men, Mason asked, pointing to the final stretch. "What exactly are we dealing with?" Bandits, Nita answered curtly. "Deserters from both armies, murderers. They control the approaches to the canyon. And you think we can just slip past them?" "No, we will likely have to fight." Her tone suggested she relished the prospect. Mason frowned. 3 of us, Against how many? Perhaps 20, Nita said. Not all are fighters. Some are just broken men who have nowhere else to go. The odds were worse than he'd hoped, but better than he'd feared. Still, with a pony weakened and only Nitika and himself as fighting forces, a direct confrontation would be suicide. "We'll need to be smarter than that," he said. Their planning was interrupted by a sound that froze all three of them. Hoofbeats approaching the hidden valley. Mason moved silently to the cave entrance, drawing his revolver. From his position, he could see a lone rider entering the valley from the northern passage, a cavalry officer's uniform visible even at this distance. Harrington alone. Mason glanced back at Nitika, who had knocked an arrow and moved to his side. "Just one," he whispered. "It's Harrington." "A trap?" she asked. "Maybe." Mason studied the approaching rider. "But I don't see others." Harrington reined in his horse near the pool, making no attempt at stealth. He dismounted slowly, hands held away from his sidearm. "Mason," he called, "I know you're here. I just want to talk." Mason and Nitika exchanged a look. "Stay with a pony," he told her. "If this goes bad, there's another way out. A narrow chimney at the back. It leads to the ridge above." "I will not run," Nitika hissed. "Not asking you to just giving you options." Before she could argue further, Mason stepped out of the cave, his revolver held at his side, but ready. "That's close enough, Luke." Harrington stopped still a good 20 yards from the cave. In the clear morning light, Mason could see his former friend looked tired, his uniform dusty from the night's search. "You're making a mistake, Mason," Harrington called. "Wouldn't be my first," Mason replied evenly. "What do you want to offer you a way out?" Harrington's voice carried a weary sincerity that might once have convinced Mason. "Whatever the Apache told you, it's not the full story." "Then enlighten me." Harrington removed his hat, wiping sweat from his brow despite the morning coolness. "That old woman, she's not just some harmless healer. She's the key to ending the Apache resistance in this territory." As he spoke, Mason studied his former friend. There was something different about him. A tightness around the eyes, a desperation beneath the confident facade. This wasn't just about duty or orders. "By leading you to gold?" Mason asked pointedly. A flicker of surprise crossed Harrington's face before he masked it. "Is that what she told you? Typical Apache misdirection?" He shook his head. "This isn't about gold, Mason. It's about peace. Peace bought with poison." "A necessary evil," Harrington admitted. "We need her cooperation, not her corpse. The poison ensures that." For what purpose? Harrington hesitated, then seemed to decide. "She knows the locations of all the hidden Apache camps in the territory, the holdouts who are still raiding settlements. With that information, we can bring them in peacefully, instead of hunting them down one by one." It was plausible enough, even logical, from a military perspective. But Mason had seen the hunger in Harrington's eyes when a pony mentioned gold. "And I'm supposed to just take your word for that?" Mason asked. "You used to," Harrington replied, a hint of the old camaraderie in his voice. "We were like brothers, Mason, until Ash Creek." The name hung between them like a physical presence. Harrington's expression hardened. "I followed orders. You abandoned your post, abandoned your men. I refused to participate in a massacre," Mace countered. "There's a difference. And how many soldiers died because you weren't there to scout properly?" Harrington demanded, anger finally breaking through his controlled facade. "How many of our brothers died because you chose Apache lives over theirs?" The accusation struck Mason like a physical blow. It was the question that had haunted his sleepless nights for 5 years. "Those women and children weren't combatants," Mason said quietly. "You know that, Luke. It was war. Harrington's voice rose. Messy, ugly war, and you left us to face it without you. A movement at the cave entrance caught Mason's eye. Nitika bowed, drawn, watching the exchange with cold intensity. Behind her, barely visible in the shadow, stood a pony, her frail body somehow radiating strength. Is that what you tell yourself? Mason asked Harrington. That Ash Creek was just the unfortunate reality of war. I tell myself I did my duty, Harrington replied, his voice dropping to match Mason's quiet tone. What do you tell yourself, Mason? That your hands are clean. We both know better. The truth in those words cut deep. Mason had left before the worst of the massacre, but not before he had seen enough to haunt him forever. Not before his inaction had cost lives. What happens if I hand over a pony? He asked, though he already knew the answer. She helps us locate the remaining Apache camps. Once that's done, she receives the antidote to the poison. No one else has to die. And I walk away free and clear. Harrington nodded. For old time's sake. You were a good soldier once, Mason. I understand why Ash Creek broke you, but this is a chance to make things right. For a moment, just a moment, Mason considered it. Not because he believed Harrington's promises, but because part of him wondered if redemption might be found in preventing further bloodshed, even at a cost. Then he looked back at a pony standing straight, despite her weakening body, her eyes holding no fear or pleading, only calm assessment of the man who would use her and discard her. And suddenly, with perfect clarity, Mason saw the parallel opponent standing now. As his grandmother had stood decades ago, facing men who saw her people as obstacles to be removed. His father had stood aside then. Mason had been too young to help. He was not too young now. I can't do that, Luke, Mason said firmly. Harrington's face fell into lines of genuine regret. Then you leave me no choice. His hand dropped to his revolver. Mason raised his own weapon in response, but before either man could fire an arrow, whistled through the air, burying itself in the ground at Harrington's feet. The next one goes through your heart, Nitika called from the cave entrance. Another arrow already knocked. Harrington froze, then slowly raised his hands. This isn't over, Mason. You're choosing the wrong side again. Maybe, Mason conceded, but it's my choice to make. A tense silence stretched between them. Then Harrington backed slowly toward his horse, keeping his hands visible. You have until sundown to reconsider, he said as he mounted. After that, I won't be able to help you. I'm not asking for your help, Mason replied. Harrington's expression hardened once more. No, you never did. He wheeled his horse around and rode out of the valley the way he had come. Mason waited until the hoof-beats faded before lowering his revolver. When he turned back toward the cave, Nita was watching him with an unreadable expression. You could have shot him, she observed. So could you, Mace countered. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. True. A pony stepped fully from the shadows, leaning heavily on a walking stick. He will return with many men, she said. We must leave now. Mason nodded, holstering his revolver. He was lying about the antidote, wasn't he? Yes, Ione confirmed. The poison he used has no antidote in their medicine. Only in ours might there be hope. And the gold is that a lie, too. A pony and Nitika exchanged a glance. It was Nitika who answered. There is gold in the canyon of shadows, she admitted. But it is on sacred Apache land the government promised would remain ours forever in the last treaty. Treaties with the Apache mean nothing to men like Harrington Mason said. To most white men, Nitika added pointedly. Mason didn't argue with that. History had proven her right too many times. Not all white men, Aponi said softly, her eyes on Mason. Just as not all Apache are warriors, the eagle feather sees beyond the color of skin to the heart beneath. She gestured to the turquoise at his neck. That is why the sacred eagle chose you. The words resonated with something deep inside Mason, the part of him that had always felt caught between worlds, neither fully white nor native, a man without a tribe. The poison spreads. Aponi continued steering them back to immediacy. And now Harrington knows where we are. We must reach the canyon before both find their mark. Mason looked between the two women, one weakened but unbowed, the other fierce and distrustful. They were asking him to choose sides in a conflict that had defined the frontier for generations to stand against not just Harrington, but the full might of the U.S. Army. It should have been an impossible choice. Yet, as he touched the turquoise stone at his neck, Mason realized it didn't feel like a choice at all. "Let's move," he said simply. "We've got ground to cover before sundown." As they gathered their few belongings and prepared to leave the hidden valley, Mason felt something shift within him, as if a burden he had carried for years had changed. Not lightened, but redistributed. The weight of his past remained, but now it seemed to push him forward rather than hold him in place. Outside, a hawk circled once more overhead, its cry echoing through the valley like a summons. Nitika looked up, a rare smile softening her features. "The spirits guide us," she said. And for the first time in many years, Mason found himself hoping that might be true. The sun climbed higher in the Arizona sky as three figures emerged from the hidden valley and disappeared into the labyrinth of red rock canyons beyond a wounded healer, a warrior maiden, and a man caught between worlds bound together by forces none of them fully understood, but all had chosen to follow. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly as Mason, Nitika, and Aponi wound through twisted canyons. Mason led the way, scouting for signs of pursuit, while Nitika guarded their rear, occasionally obscuring their tracks. Aponi rode Mason's horse, the blue tendrils of poison creeping upward across her neck, stark against her weathered skin. Mason paused at a ridge overlooking their back trail, helping Aponi dismount to rest in the meager shade of a boulder. Nita approached, her expression tense. "We're being followed," she said without preamble. Mason nodded grimly. "I spotted dust clouds an hour back." "Harrington, no different riders." Her eyes narrowed as she studied the distant desert. "Harrington's men move in formation. These spread out, converge, spread again. Hunters, bounty hunters, or worse." She touched the knife at her belt. "Men who hunt Apache for sport and scalps." A cold anger flashed through Mason. He'd encountered such men during his scouting days, men who boasted of their trophies in frontier saloons. The silence shattered as a rifle cracked in the distance. A bullet kicked up dust feet from where they stood. "Move!" Mason shouted, helping Aponi back onto the horse as Nitika scanned the ridgel lines. A glint of metal flashed on a distant bluff. Another shot rang out closer this time. Their position was exposed, the narrow canyon offering little cover. This way, Nitika pointed to a nearly invisible crevice in the canyon wall. They raced toward it, Mason leading the horse with Aponi clutching its mane. As they squeezed through the narrow opening, bullets ricocheted off stone behind them. The crevice widened into a passage barely wide enough for the horse. After several twisting turns, the passage opened unexpectedly into blinding sunlight. Mason stopped, momentarily stunned by what lay before them, a hidden canyon untouched by time. Ancient petroglyphs covered the red rock walls, and at the canyon center stood a perfect circle of standing stones, weathered by centuries, but unmistakably placed by human hands. The Valley of Spirits. Nitika announced, her voice dropping respectfully. A pony straightened on the horse, some pain leaving her face. We are the first to return in many seasons. Mason felt it too. A strange energy pulsing from the ground itself. The turquoise stone at his neck grew warm, vibrating slightly against his skin. "What is this place?" he asked. "A meeting place between worlds." A pony replied, her eyes reflecting ancient knowledge. They made their way to the stone circle. Each standing stone bore symbols similar to those on the canyon walls, patterns that shifted subtly when viewed from different angles. Nitika helped a pony to a flat stone at the circle's center that resembled an altar. "We will rest here tonight," Nitika explained. "The hunters will not follow us into this valley after dark. You seem certain of that." A knowing smile touched Nitika's lips. "They have tried before. Those who entered at night never returned." Mason might have dismissed such talk as superstition a week ago. Now, standing in this ancient place, with the turquoise warm against his chest, he found himself less certain of the boundaries between the world he knew and the one these women inhabited. Underscore, 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 underscore. 20. My South. Lieutenant Harrington stood at a canyon rim studying tracks in the dust. Behind him, a line of cavalry soldiers waited for orders, their horses stamping impatiently in the fading light. "L," demanded Governor Carson, his expensive riding clothes already coated with dust. The portly Paulet politician had insisted on joining this expedition, a fact that irritated Harrington endlessly. "They're heading east," Harrington replied, not bothering to hide his disdain. "Toward the Canyon of Shadows, as I predicted." "Then why are we stopping? We should pursue immediately." Harrington fixed the governor with a cold stare. "Night travel in this terrain would kill half our horses, and probably some men. We'll camp and continue at first light. The poison will kill that old witch soon," Carson argued. "If she dies before revealing the location, she won't die yet." "The poison was designed to work slowly, and they're heading exactly where we want them to go." A young lieutenant approached hesitantly. "Sir, scouts report another group tracking the Apache civilians heavily armed." Harrington cursed under his breath. "Bounty hunters. Carson's little insurance policy, I presume." The governor's expression confirmed his suspicion. $500 for the old woman, dead or alive," Carson admitted, without shame. "Business is business, Lieutenant." "You fool," Harrington hissed. "If they kill her before we reach the canyon, then we still have her granddaughter and your former friend. One of them will talk." Harrington fought to control his temper. The governor didn't understand what they were truly seeking. Thought this was merely about gold and land. "Double the watch tonight," he ordered the lieutenant, "and have the men ready to ride at first light." As the officer moved to comply, Harrington gazed eastward toward the distant peaks of the Canyon of Shadows. Somewhere out there, Mason Reed was unwittingly leading them straight to power, beyond Carson's limited imagination. UNC night fell over the Valley of Spirits. Mason built a small fire near the stone circle, its light casting long shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. The stars emerged with breathtaking clarity, countless diamond pin pricks in a velvet sky. "It is time," a pony said, opening her eyes. Nita helped her grandmother to the central altar stone. A pony emptied a small pouch, herbs, feathers, bones, and colored stones onto the flat surface. "What are they doing?" Mason asked. "Seeking guidance," came a voice from the darkness. Mason turned to find Chaitan stepping from the shadows, materializing as if from nowhere. "I've been following since you left the hidden valley," the old man explained. "Harrington has more men than you know. I've been leading them astray." The vision-seeking ceremony He continued, nodding toward the women. A pony calls to the spirits for healing and guidance. Nita began a soft chant, her voice weaving through the night air. A pony arranged the items in a pattern Mason couldn't decipher, then raised her arms toward the star-filled sky. What happened next challenged everything Mason thought he knew about reality. The air around a pony began to shimmer like heat rising from sun-baked rocks. The blue tendrils of poison glowed beneath her skin. The turquoise at Mason's neck grew hot, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. Their chant became a harmony that resonated with the stones around them. The fire flared suddenly higher, casting shadows that moved with purpose, like dancers circling the stone ring. Then Mason saw them, figures moving at the edges of the firelight, indistinct forms watching with ancient eyes. "Do you see them?" he whispered to Chiton. The old man nodded. "The ancestors. They come when called, if the need is great enough." Mason blinked, and the figures were gone. But the strange energy remained building as the women's chant intensified. Suddenly, a pony cried out in a language Mason didn't recognize. She collapsed forward onto the altar stone, her body convulsing. Mason started forward, but Chiton's iron grip stopped him. "Do not interfere. The spirits speak through her now." For several long minutes, a pony remained motionless. When she finally stirred, her eyes had changed depthless and ancient, as if they had seen beyond the veil of the physical world. "They have shown me the path," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in days, "and the price that must be paid." She beckoned Mason forward. "The sacred eagle chose wisely," she said. "You stand between worlds, Mason Reed. Not white, not Cherokee, but something new." "What did you see?" he asked. "The canyon of shadows holds the moonflower that will draw out this poison, but it is guarded by older powers." She touched the turquoise at his neck. "You will face a choice there between the world of your father and the world of your grandmother, between what you were and what you might become." As Nita prepared a strengthening tea, Mason returned to the fire, his mind reeling. Chiton joined him. "You doubt what you saw," the old man observed. Mason prodded the fire, sending sparks skyward. "I don't know what I saw. The boundary between worlds is thinner in places like this, thinner still for those with blood from both sides." Mason looked up sharply. "How did you find me that night in Copper Springs, of all people who might have been beaten by drunks? Why were you there?" Chiton's eyes reflected the firelight. "I was looking for you. For 3 summers I have searched for the one who could wear the sacred eagle." "Why me?" "Because you were there at Ash Creek, Chiton," said his voice hardening. "You saw the massacre, but did not participate. You walked away rather than follow those orders." Mason felt struck. "How could you possibly know that my son died at Ash Creek?" Chiton said simply. "But before he did, he saw a scout turn away, refused to fight. The spirit showed me your face in a vision." The revelation left Mason speechless. Chiton had sought him out specifically, had given him the turquoise stone, knowing exactly who he was. "I didn't stop it," Mason said, the old guilt rising. "I just walked away." "And in doing so you kept your soul intact," Chiton replied. "That matters more than you know." Later, Nitika joined Mason at the fire. For a time they sat in silence, sipping bitter tea. "You think all of this is foolishness," she said finally. "Spirit, sacred places walking between worlds." Mason considered his answer. "A week ago, I would have said yes, without hesitation. And now, I'm not so certain." Nita's expression softened slightly. "My father was like you. He married my mother, lived with our people, but never fully believed in our ways." A shadow crossed her face. When the soldiers came, he tried to reason with them, white man to white man. They shot him first. The matter-of-fact way she described her father's murder struck Mason deeply. "I don't tell you this for pity," Nita continued. "I tell you because you must understand what we face. The men who hunt us do not see people. They see obstacles." Her eyes, reflecting the firelight, met his. "Even you, with your Cherokee blood, would be nothing but a traitor in their eyes." The truth of her words settled heavily on Mason. He'd spent his life trying to pass as white, burying the part of himself that connected him to his grandmother. But Nitika was right. Men like Harrington would never see past the taint of native blood. "Tonight, we must decide how to reach the canyon alive." Nita said grandmother's vision showed many dangers ahead. Not just men, but other things like the Guardian that Apache mentioned. Nitka's face grew solemn. "The North Passage is the quickest route to the canyon, but it has been forbidden to my people for generations. Only those with the proper offerings may pass through the Guardian's domain." Across the circle, Apache and Chaitan remained deep in conversation, their heads close together. Despite the ceremony's success in halting the poisons, Advance Apache looked frail. "Well, find a way through, Mason," said determination replacing doubt. "Whatever it takes," Nitika studied him for a moment. "You have decided, then, to see this through to the end." Mason touched the turquoise stone. "Yes," he said simply. A ghost of a smile touched Nitika's lips. "Good, because grandmother's vision showed you holding the moonflower." Dawn broke over the Valley of Spirits in a spectacular display of color. Apache sat cross-legged at the stone circle center. The blue lines of poison halted in their advance. Nitika returned from scouting her usual grace, giving way to urgency. Riders, she announced, breathing hard. "Coming from both west and south. At least 20 moving fast," Harrington Mason asked, checking his weapons. "Some are soldiers," she confirmed. "Others are the hunters from yesterday. They seem to be working together now. How much time do we have? 2 hours, maybe less." Apache joined them, moving more steadily than she had in days. "Then we must take the North Passage now." Chaitan's expression grew grave. "Are you certain the price will be paid?" Apache cut him off. "We have no choice." They set off toward the northern rim of the valley, climbing a steep trail between massive boulders. At the top, a narrow cliff in the red rock opened before them. "The North Passage," Nita announced, her voice dropping to a whisper. Unlike the other canyons, this one felt immediately different. The air was cooler, almost damp, and an unnatural silence pressed around them as if the rocks were holding their breath. No birds called, no insects hummed. Even the dust seemed reluctant to rise beneath their feet. Mason led the way, hand never far from his revolver. The turquoise stone against his chest grew strangely cool, a marked change that heightened his unease. After nearly an hour of walking, the passage opened into a circular space with high walls like a natural amphitheater. At the far end, a pool of dark water reflected the blue sky above its surface, unnaturally still. "The Guardian's pool," Aeone announced quietly. "We go no further until invited." Mason helped her dismount, then surveyed the enclosed space with a scout's eye. One entrance, one exit, and nowhere to hide if things went wrong. "What now?" he asked. "She will call to the Guardian," Chaitan explained. "If it answers, we may proceed, and if it doesn't, then we die here either, by the Guardian's will or Harrington's bullets when he catches up." The stark assessment sent a chill through Mason. He watched as Apache knelt at the pool's edge, dipping her fingers into the dark water. She began to sing a low melodic chant that echoed strangely off the encircling walls. Minutes passed with no discernible change. Mason shifted uneasily, acutely aware of their vulnerability if Harrington's forces arrived. A sudden movement at the pool's center caught his eye. The still surface rippled, though there was no wind. A pony's chant grew louder, more insistent. The ripples converged at the center into a swirling motion, as if an unseen hand stirred the depths. Then, impossibly, the water began to rise, not as a splash or fountain, but as a coherent column that took shape as it ascended. It solidified until it stood nearly 7 feet tall, resembling a human figure, with features that shifted like reflections in disturbed water. Mason's hand moved instinctively to his revolver, but he knew intuitively that bullets would be useless against such an entity. The figure spoke not aloud but directly into Mason's mind. "Why do you seek passage, daughter of the desert people?" A pony answered, her voice steady, despite her weakened condition. "We journey to the canyon of shadows, ancient one. I seek the moonflower to drive out the poison in my veins." The watery head tilted slightly, regarding the blue lines at her neck. "Man's poison. Man's malice. Why should I allow such troubles to pass through my domain?" "Because the balance is disturbed," a pony replied. "Those who poison me seek knowledge not meant for them. Knowledge that could threaten even your ancient peace." The figure's attention shifted to Mason with an intensity he felt like physical pressure. "And this one, not of your people, yet not entirely of the other. Why does he walk with you?" Mason found himself stepping forward. "I made a choice to help them reach the canyon. Choice or destiny. The blood remembers what the mind forgets. Son of 2 worlds." The figure pointed at the turquoise stone. "You wear the sacred eagle, yet you do not understand its purpose. You walk between worlds, yet you do not see the path." "I see enough," Mason replied, boldness overcoming his fear. "I see people who need help against those who would harm them." A sound like water rushing over stones filled the chamber. Laughter. Bold words from one so blind, yet there is truth in them. The figure returned its attention to a pony. "I will grant passage, medicine woman, but the price must be paid." "What will you offer?" "I offer knowledge," she said. "The ritual of calling the rain, known only to my line, passed down through 17 generations. A worthy offering, but insufficient alone." "Then I also offer this." A pony extracted a crystal arrowhead so clear it appeared made from solid water. "The tear of the sky, given to my ancestor by your kind when the world was young." The water figure surged the tear. "Long have I wondered where it journeyed." "Wait," Nita interjected. "Grandmother, the calling ritual. Without it, how will our people survive the dry seasons? Some sacrifices must be made for the greater need." A pony replied gently. "Then let me pay part of it," Nita insisted. "I know half the ritual. Take that knowledge from me instead." The water figure studied her. "The young one offers a share of the burden. This is unexpected. She is not ready." A pony protested. "The knowledge is incomplete in her mind, yet freely offered." "Very well, half from each in the tear as well." Nitika moved beside her grandmother. The water figure extended both arms toward them. As its fluid fingers touched their foreheads, both stiffened. Then something went wrong. The figure's form began to pulse erratically, distorting. A pony cried out as the blue lines of poison suddenly glowed brightly. The guardian's hand withdrew from her as if burned, but remained connected to Nitika, who stood rigid, face contorted in silent agony. "Corruption!" The guardian's mental voice boomed. "The poison is not of this world. It resists me." The chamber began to tremble, stones falling from the walls. The pool's surface churned violently. "Please," a pony begged, falling to her knees. "The fault is not hers. The balance is disturbed," the guardian replied, its form becoming increasingly unstable. I cannot take the knowledge without taking the corruption as well. Without thinking, Mason pulled the turquoise stone from around his neck. "Take this instead," he shouted, holding the sacred eagle aloft. "It's a fair trade, knowledge for knowledge. You would give up the sacred eagle. Do you understand what you offer Bridgewalker? No." Mason admitted. "But I know its value. Take it and let them pass." The figure considered for what felt like eternity. Then a liquid tendril shot out and wrapped around the turquoise stone. Mason felt a jolt of energy pass through him as the guardian extracted something from the stone. The turquoise remained in his palm, but changed. Its vibrant blue now muted the eagle carving less distinct, as if part of its essence had been drawn away. "It is done," the guardian announced, releasing Nitika. "The sacred eagle's wisdom supplements the incomplete knowledge. The balance is acceptable." The chamber stopped trembling. The pool's surface gradually calmed. "You may pass through my domain, but heed this warning. What waits in the Canyon of Shadows is older and more dangerous than the poison in the medicine woman's veins. The boundary hangs by a thread. Tread carefully." The figure collapsed back into the pool with a sound like distant thunder. A pony placed the crystal arrowhead on the water's surface. Instead of sinking, it dissolved, spreading ripples of light that quickly faded. Mason helped Nita to her feet. "Are you all right?" "I think so," she replied shakily. "It was like having part of my mind erased." "The rain ritual," she nodded. "Half gone from me, half from grandmother." Her eyes found the dulled turquoise. "What did you do?" "I'm not sure," he admitted, replacing the stone around his neck. It felt lighter, somehow, no longer pulsing with warmth. But it seemed right. The sacred eagle gave up part of its power, a pony said, approaching, with Chaitan's support. "Power you will now have to find within yourself. Instead, a sacrifice worthy of a true Bridgewalker." "We must move," Chaitan urged. "I sense riders approaching the valley." As they passed through the exit cliff beyond the pool, Mason felt a subtle shift in the air. A lightning, as if they had moved from one domain into another. Behind them, the Guardian's pool receded into shadow, its secrets once again hidden. The path climbed steeply toward the highlands. In the far distance, tiny figures were entering the Valley of Spirits Harrington's vanguard. By mid-afternoon, they reached a rugged plateau dotted with twisted junipers. From this vantage point, Mason could see for miles the distant peaks of the Canyon of Shadows to the east, and pursuing riders to the west, perhaps an hour behind them. "We'll never outrun them at this pace," he said grimly. "We don't need to," Chaitan replied. "We only need to reach the border stones by sunset." "What border stones?" "The markers of Devil's territory," Nitika explained. "Once past them we enter land. Even Harrington's men fear to tread." "These devil men you mentioned, who are they?" "Deserters, outlaws, killers." Nita's face hardened, led by a man they call El Cuchillo, the knife. She unconsciously touched a scar on her arm. "We have history." Mason raised an eyebrow. "You faced him before. 2 years ago he raided our camp, took 4 women. I tracked them, managed to free 2. Her voice remained steady, but Mason saw the pain in her eyes. "The others were already dead. I put an arrow through El Cuchillo's shoulder before escaping. And now we're heading straight into his territory. The Canyon of Shadows lies beyond." A pony said, "There is no other way with Harrington at our backs." By late afternoon, they reached what Chaitan called the border stones. A line of peculiar rock formation stretched across their path. Each stone was shaped almost like a crude human figure marked with faded red symbols. "Devil's territory begins here," Chaitan announced solemnly. They crossed the line of border stones as the sun descended. The landscape seemed little different yet. Mason felt a prickling sensation at the back of his neck, as if they were being watched. The dulled turquoise stone lay cold against his chest, offering no guidance or warmth as it once had. Whatever power Mason had sacrificed to the guardian, he missed its presence. Now there, Nitka said, pointing ahead, a cave where we can shelter for the night. The cave was well positioned high, with a narrow entrance easily defended. As Nita tended to a pony, Mason and Chetan gathered firewood. "Will Harrington follow us past the border stones?" Mason asked. "Not in darkness," Chetan replied. "They will camp at the border and enter at dawn if they enter at all." "And the devil men?" "They already know we are here," Chetan said, matter-of-factly. "This is their domain." As they shared a meager meal, Mason studied his companions. A pony's condition had deteriorated. The blue poison now covered most of her face. Her breathing increasingly labored. Nitika sat close beside her grandmother, her stoic expression giving way to barely concealed worry. "Tell me about the moonflower." Mason said, "Why is it the only cure for this poison?" "The moonflower blooms only in the boundary space where our world touches the spirit realm." A pony answered, her voice weak but clear. "Its petals absorb poison from both body and soul. This is no ordinary venom. It was created with hatred, meant to corrupt the spirit as it kills the flesh." Harrington said it was to ensure your cooperation. "A half-truth," a pony replied. "The poison binds my spirit as well as my body. Had I revealed the secrets he seeks, I would still die, but my spirit would remain trapped, unable to join the ancestors, forced to wander between worlds forever." The implications chilled Mason. Not just murder, then, but spiritual imprisonment. "How do we find this moonflower once we reach the canyon?" "I will know its location," a pony said, "but retrieving it, that task may fall to you. The boundary space reacts differently to those of mixed blood. You might pass where others cannot." The moment was broken by a sound from outside, a soft whistle that might have been the wind, except there was no wind. Mason moved silently to the cave entrance. At first he saw nothing, then movement, shadowy figures surrounding the cave, at least a dozen, moving with practiced stealth. "We have company," he whispered, reaching for his rifle. A voice called out from the darkness, a woman's voice speaking in Apache. Nita's head snapped up, her expression one of utter shock. "It cannot be," she whispered. "What is it?" Mason asked. "She called my name, said she has been waiting for me." Nita's voice trembled. "It's Elena, one of the women taken by El Cuchillo, one I couldn't save." Elena. Nita called into the darkness, a figure separated from the shadows, a young Apache woman dressed in a strange mixture of traditional clothing and frontier garb. She stopped several yards from the cave entrance. "Sister of my heart," she said in accented English. "We thought you would never come back for us." "Us?" Nita asked. "Mara lives as well." Elena nodded. "We both survived. We are changed, but we live." Mason kept his rifle ready. "Who are the others with you?" "My people now," Elena replied. "El Cuchillo's band. We come to warn you. He knows you are here. He remembers the arrow in his shoulder. He will come for you at dawn." "Why warn us?" Mason asked skeptically. "If you're with his band." "Because we have waited for this moment," Elena said, her eyes never leaving Nitika. "For someone from the old life to come, someone who might help us escape." "It could be a trap," Mason cautioned, catching Nitika's arm as she took a step forward. "Your man is wise to be careful," Elena said bitterly. "Trust dies quickly in Devil's territory, but time grows short." El Cuchillo gathers his men 30 rifles at least. If what you say is true, we need to move. Too dangerous in darkness. The patrol will find you. But I know a place, a hidden canyon where you can shelter until tomorrow night. Then I will guide you to the Canyon of Shadows. Nita looked to a pony who nodded almost imperceptibly. We will follow you, Nita told Elena, but at the first sign of betrayal. I understand, Elena interrupted. I would do the same. What do you think? Mason asked Chitan quietly. Can we trust her? The spirits are silent here. Each must rely on their own judgment. It was hardly reassuring, but with Harrington behind them, Melcuccio's band closing in, and a pony's condition worsening, options were few. Stay alert, Mason told Nitika as they helped a pony up. If this is a trap, we'll need to react quickly. Elena led them through the darkness with the confidence of one who knew every rock and ravine. They moved in silence, following a route that seemed deliberately confusing, doubling back, crossing streams, taking paths that appeared to lead nowhere before suddenly opening into new terrain. After an hour, Mason lost all sense of direction. A pony rode his horse, her condition worsening despite Citan's herbs. The blue poison had spread completely across her face, giving her features an otherworldly appearance in the starlight. Finally, they descended into a narrow canyon hidden so perfectly among the rocks that Mason would have walked past its entrance. Unlike the barren plateau above this place, held life a small spring fed a stream that nurtured cottonwoods and willows. The sound of water flowing over stone provided natural cover for any noise they might make. We will be safe here until tomorrow night, Elena announced, gesturing toward crude shelters built against the canyon wall. My friends and I live apart from El Cuchillo's main camp. He thinks we scout for him, but we prepare for the day of reckoning. How many are you? Mason asked, still wary. 11. Elena replied, 7 women taken from various tribes, 4 men who refused to participate in El Cuchillo's cruelties. We be our time waiting for the right moment. As they made a pony comfortable in one of the shelters, Nitika and Elena spoke quietly in Apache. Their conversation punctuated by brief embraces and quickly wiped tears. Yet Mason noticed Nitika maintained a certain reserve. Your grandmother's condition worsens, Elena observed, examining a pony. This poison, I have seen it before. El Cuchillo trades with a white officer for it. Uses it on captives who will not bend to his will. Harrington, Mason said grimly. Elena nodded. The one with dead eyes. He comes, sometimes trades weapons and whiskey for information. Her expression darkened. He and El Cuchillo are much alike, though one wears a uniform and the other rags. What do you know of the Canyon of Shadows? Chaitan asked. A forbidden place, Elena replied, fear entering her voice. El Cuchillo sends men there sometimes seeking gold or other treasures. Few return. Those who do speak of shadows that move without bodies, of voices that whisper madness. Yet, you offer to guide us there. Elena's eyes hardened. To escape this life, to help the daughter of my mother's sister, I would guide you to the gates of the afterworld itself. Mason joined Nitika outside a pony shelter. The young woman's face showed the strain of the day's events. Are you all right? He asked quietly. Elena was like a sister to me, Nitika said, her gaze on the starlit canyon. When El Cuchillo took her, I swore I would bring her back or die trying. I failed. You tried, and she survived. Survived? Yes, but changed. Nita turned to him, her expression troubled. There is something she is not telling us. I know her too well to miss it. Do you think she means to betray us? No, not betray. But there is something more to her plan than simple escape. She glanced toward a pony shelter. Grandmother sensed it as well. She warns caution. "I'll take first watch," Mason offered. As Nita moved away to check on a pony, Mason found a position near the canyon entrance that offered a good view of both the approach and the camp itself. The events of the past days tumbled through his mind. The Guardian's pool, the advancing poison, Elena's unexpected appearance. But most troubling was the dulled turquoise stone, now lifeless, around his neck. Whatever power he had, sacrificed its absence, left him feeling strangely vulnerable. Saitan appeared silently beside him, offering a cup of tea to keep the mind sharp. After a moment of companionable silence, Mason voiced the question troubling him since the Guardian's pool. "What exactly did I give up when the Guardian took something from the stone?" Chatton considered before answering. The sacred eagle contained wisdom, knowledge of paths between worlds, ways of seeing beyond ordinary sight. "But the stone is still here," Mason observed, touching the dulled turquoise. "The vessel remains, but much of its power has transferred elsewhere." Chaitan studied Mason with penetrating eyes. "However, the eagle chose you for a reason. Its essence may have awakened something in your blood, something always there, merely dormant." "My Cherokee blood, you mean?" Chaitan nodded. "Your grandmother would have taught you had she been permitted. The ability to walk between worlds doesn't reside in the stonemason reed. It resides in you. The eagle was merely a guide." "And now I've lost that guide," Mason said grimly. Perhaps you have simply advanced to the next lesson, standing on your own feet, rather than leaning on the eagle's wings." A faint sound reached them, distant but distinct in the night air. Gunfire far to the north. Harrington's men, Mason guessed, scanning the darkness beyond the canyon, testing the boundaries of Devil's territory. Chaitan agreed. The night patrols must have found them. The night passed without further incident. Mason's dreams were fragmented. Images of water that moved with purpose, of stone faces that spoke without mouths, of paths that led between stars. He woke at dawn, feeling less rested than when he'd lain down. The camp was already stirring, Elena's small band preparing for the day. They were a ragged group, men and women bearing marks of hard lives, yet moving with the discipline of those who had found purpose in survival. Checking on a pony, Mason found her condition unchanged, neither better nor worse. Cheaton sat beside her, burning small pinches of herbs that filled the shelter with aromatic smoke. "A holding pattern," the old man explained. "It cannot cure, but it may slow the poison's advance until we reach the canyon." Outside, Nitika and Elena examined a crude map scratched on bark. They looked up as Mason approached. "Elena's scouts report Harrington's force has split," Nitika informed him. "Half remain at the border. Half entered Devil's territory and are searching eastward. And El Cuchillo, his main band, hunts to the south today." Elena replied, "Chasing settlers who trespassed. But he has left patrols throughout his territory, including near the canyon entrance. Can we avoid them?" Elena nodded. "There is a way known only to my group, a high path through the cliffs that El Cuchillo's men consider impassable." Her expression grew serious, "But it will be difficult, especially for the old woman, and we must travel light. Leave the horse behind." The day passed with agonizing slowness. Mason helped prepare for the journey, fashioning a light TV that could be carried by 2 people over rough terrain. Not everyone would be going. 4 of Elena's group would remain behind to maintain the appearance of normal activity. "They risk much for us," Nitika observed. "For you," Mason corrected gently. "Elena would not do this for strangers." Nita's expression softened momentarily. "But be watchful tonight. Elena planned something beyond simple escape." I feel it. As darkness fell, Elena gathered them at the eastern end of the canyon where a narrow crack in the cliff wall revealed a steep path upward. This leads to the high trail, she explained. We must climb in silence. El Cuchillo's patrol passes along the ridge every 2 hours. A pony was secured on the lightweight travoa, the blue poison now covering her entire face and spreading down her neck. 4 of Elena's strongest would take turns carrying her. They began the ascent in near-total darkness, feeling their way more than seeing. The path was treacherous, narrow ledges, loose stone, sudden drop-offs. Mason found himself relying on instincts he didn't know he possessed, placing his feet with shitty that seemed to come from somewhere beyond conscious thought. After an hour of climbing, they reached a narrow ridge that ran eastward toward distant peaks silhouetted against the star-filled sky. The canyon of shadows lies beyond those peaks, Elena whispered. 4 hours' journey, then, down into the valley beyond. A sharp whistle came from their scout ahead, warning. Everyone froze, pressing against the rock wall. In the distance, firelight appeared. Torches of a patrol moving along a lower path. For agonizing minutes, they remained motionless. Mason counted 8 men heavily armed. If they looked up at the right moment, they might spot the party despite the darkness. But the patrol continued on, their torchlight gradually fading. Elena signaled to continue. They moved faster now, aware that time worked against them. A pony's condition deteriorated rapidly. The blue poison spreading visibly, even in darkness now, extending down her arms. The ridge gradually widened as they approached the peaks, becoming a trail that wound between massive boulders. As they rounded the base of the tallest peak, the landscape opened before them, a vast valley bathed in silvery starlight. At its center, a massive formation rose from the desert floor like a colossal hand reaching for the sky. By its fingers formed by towering spires of red rock. The Canyon of Shadows, Elena announced with awe. The entrance lies at its base. They began descending into the valley. Mason took his turn helping carry a pony's travoa, alarmed by how cold her skin felt despite the warm night. The blue poison now covered most of her visible body, pulsing with an unnatural rhythm that matched her labored breathing. "Hold on," he murmured. "We're almost there." Her eyes flickered open. Those ancient eyes now transformed by the poison into pools of glowing blue light. "The veil thins," she whispered. "I can see both sides now." They had reached the valley floor when Elena raised her hand, signaling a halt. At first, Mason heard nothing but the night wind, then voices drifting from ahead. Elena and Nitika crept forward to investigate. Minutes later, they returned, expressions grim. El Cuchillo's men guard the main entrance. Nitika reported at least 10 with rifles. The secondary entrance I spoke of, Elena added, "We must reach it unseen a half-mile around the canyon's base." They changed direction, moving with painstaking care through shadows of massive boulders. The voices grew louder as they skirted the patrol, then gradually faded. Elena stopped before what appeared to be a solid rock face. "Here," she whispered, running her hands over the stone the hidden way. She pressed against a particular spot, and a section of rock shifted. Not a solid wall at all, but a perfectly balanced boulder that pivoted on a hidden fulcrum. Behind it lay a narrow opening just wide enough for a person to slip through sideways. Quickly, Elena urged, "Once inside, we are safe from El Cuchillo's men. They fear to enter even the main passage." One by one, they squeezed through the opening. The travoa bearing a pony had to be dismantled. The old woman carefully passed through, then reassembled. Mason went last, helping ease the stone door closed. They found themselves in a narrow passage that sloped gently downward, its walls smooth, as if carved by water over millennia. No light penetrated from outside until Elena produced small torches that cast flickering shadows. Now she said, her voice echoing slightly in the confined space. "We enter the canyon of shadows. Stay close. Touch nothing. Speak only if necessary." Her eyes reflected the torchlight, and pray that the moonflower still blooms in the boundary place. They moved deeper into the passage, leaving the world of men behind, and entering a realm where ancient powers still held sway. The dulled turquoise stone lay cold against Mason's chest. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it not with the sacred eagle's wisdom, but with his own. The blood remembers what the mind forgets. Chetan had said. Mason could only hope that his blood remembered enough to see them through what awaited in the depths of the canyon of shadows. The passage wound deeper beneath the earth, its walls glowing with a faint bluish phosphorescence that rendered Elena's torches almost unnecessary. Mason walked behind the carriers of a pony's travois, every sense alert. The turquoise hung cold against his chest. Its power diminished, but not entirely absent, like an echo fading in a canyon. The air grew cooler with each step, carrying scents of damp stone and something else. A sweet, unfamiliar fragrance that reminded Mason of summer thunderstorms. The silence was absolute, except for their footfalls and a pony's labored breathing. "How much further?" Mason asked, keeping his voice low. Elena glanced back, her face ghostly in the blue-tinged light. "Not far to the inner chamber, but the boundary place," she hesitated. "That lies beyond my knowledge." "You've never been there." Mason's suspicion flickered anew. "I thought you said you knew this canyon. I know the passages, the chambers, the dangers that walk in shadow." Elena replied, a defensive edge to her voice. "But the boundary place, it shifts, changes. No one finds it the same way twice." Mason exchanged glances with Nitika, whose expression mirrored his own weariness. Whatever Elena's true motives, they were running out of options. The blue poison had spread visibly across a pony's face during their journey, pulsing with a rhythm independent of her heartbeat. After another quarter hour of descent, the passage widened suddenly into a vast cavern. Mason stopped at the threshold, momentarily stunned by the sight. Massive stone columns rose from floor to ceiling like the pillars of some ancient temple. Between them, pools of still black water reflected the luminous ceiling where thousands of tiny crystals glittered like stars. "The Hall of Echoes," Elena whispered with reverence. As if in response, faint whispers seemed to ripple through the chamber, though Mason couldn't make out words or identify their source. The carriers gently set down a pony's travois. The old woman's breathing had grown shallow, her skin cold, despite the blue glow of poison. Nitka knelt beside her grandmother, applying a paste of herbs Chetan had prepared. "Stay with us," she murmured. "We're close now." The pony's eyes flickered open, revealing irises transformed to pools of glowing blue light. "I hear them," she whispered. "The voices beyond the veil. They called to me, Nika." Mason felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cavern's cool air. He turned to Chetan, who was studying the chamber with intense focus. "What now?" Mason asked. "Where do we find this moonflower?" The old man pointed toward the far end of the cavern where a narrow archway opened into darkness. "The boundary lies through there, but reaching it," he shook his head. "The path shows itself differently to each seeker." "What does that mean?" "It means," Elena interjected, "that, from this point, no two people see the same canyon. The path split. Some find what they seek, others become lost forever." Mason looked skeptical. "We all walk through the same archway, but end up in different places. Not different places, Chitan corrected. Different aspects of the same place. The canyon exists in many layers, like pages in a book pressed together. Most see only one page at a time. Except those who can walk between. Nitika added, looking meaningfully at Mason. Like you. Before Mason could respond, a disturbing sound echoed through the cavern. Something between a growl and the scrape of stone against stone. Elena's people instantly drew weapons, forming a protective circle around a pony. "What was that?" Mason whispered, drawing his revolver. "Guardian spirits," Elena replied, her voice tight with fear. "They sense intruders." The sound came again closer this time, followed by a rippling disturbance across one of the black pools. Something was moving beneath the surface. "We cannot linger," Chiton urged. "The boundary grows thin with a pony's condition. We must reach the moonflower before her spirit crosses over." One of Elena's warriors, Quantiteur, cried out suddenly, pointing toward the ceiling. The star-like crystals were dimming one by one, plunging sections of the cavern into absolute darkness. "They're cutting off our path," Elena said, her composure cracking. "We must move now." Mason helped carefully lift Ione's travois again as they started across the vast chamber. The whispers intensified, becoming an unintelligible chorus that seemed to come from the very air around them. Out of the corner of his eye, Mason caught glimpses of movement, shadowy figures that vanished when he turned to look directly. Halfway across, one of the black pools erupted. A column of water rose eerily similar to the guardian they had encountered earlier, but this form was darker, more menacing. It spoke no words, but emanated a palpable sense of malice. Elena shouted something in Apache. Two of her warriors stepped forward, firing rifles at the water form. The bullets passed through harmlessly, and with a motion like a crashing wave, the entity surged forward. "Run!" Nitika cried. They raced toward the archway, a pony's carrier struggling to keep the travois level. Behind them, more pools erupted, water shapes pursuing with frightening speed. Mason fired at the nearest his bullet, having no more effect than Elena's warriors had. The cold turquoise stone suddenly flared with warmth against Mason's chest, a brief pulse of energy that surprised him. Acting on instinct, he stopped and turned to face the pursuing entities. "Mason, what are you doing?" Nitika shouted. Fear evident in her voice, he wasn't entirely sure himself. Something compelled him. A half-remembered fragment from his grandmother's forbidden stories, perhaps, or some deeper instinct awakened by their journey. He grabbed the stone, holding it toward the water shapes. "We seek the moonflower for healing, not desecration," he shouted. "By the sacred eagle's right, we claim peaceful passage." The words came unbidden to his lips, as if spoken by another voice using his tongue. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the water shapes halted, rippling with what might have been uncertainty. Just as Mason felt a surge of hope, the stone's brief warmth faded. The water entities resumed their advance, now moving more purposefully toward him. He backed away, raising his revolver despite its proven ineffectiveness. Mason Nitika had returned, bow drawn. She loosed an arrow at the nearest entity. Unlike the bullets, her arrow didn't pass through harmlessly. When it struck the water shape, emitted a high, keening sound and partially collapsed. "Iron," she called from the archway. "The arrowhead is iron. It disrupts their form." Mason had no iron arrows, but he did have his knife, a good steel blade with an iron core. He drew it, facing the approaching entities with renewed determination. "Get a pony through the arch," he shouted to Nitika. "I'll hold them back." "No, we stay together," she replied, loosing another arrow that temporarily dispersed a second water shape. The entities were circling now, more cautious after seeing their companions wounded. Mason seized the moment, grabbing Nitika's arm and pulling her toward the archway, where Elena waited with a pony and the others together. Then he conceded, but hurry. They backed toward the arch, Mason slashing with his knife, when any of the water shapes ventured too close. Nitika's remaining arrows providing crucial moments of reprieve. When they finally reached the archway, the entities had formed a semicircle just beyond reach, pulsing with what felt like cold fury. Through the arch, Saiten urged they cannot follow beyond the threshold. One by one, they passed through. Mason went last, knife held ready, until he stepped backward through the opening. As he passed through the arch, a strange sensation washed over him, like walking through a veil of cold mist. The pursuing entities stopped at the threshold, unable or unwilling to follow. Mason found himself in a narrow corridor carved from the same phosphorescent stone. Ahead, Elena's group had stopped where the passage split into 3 separate tunnels. "Which way?" he asked, catching up to them. Elena looked uncertain for the first time since they'd met. "In all my scouting, I've never come this far. El Cuchillos men who ventured this deep never returned. The moonflower grows in the boundary place." A pony whispered from her travois, her voice barely audible. "Near water and moonlight, where the worlds touch." Water and moonlight were underground, Mason pointed out. Chaitan moved to each tunnel entrance, closing his eyes, as if listening to something only he could hear. The old ways tell of a lake, at the canyon's heart, open to the sky. He pointed to the rightmost tunnel. "This path feels of water, and this one of air." Nitka said, standing before the center tunnel, "I can feel a breeze." Then we split up. Elena decided, "My warriors will explore the left path. Nita and Chayan take the center. Mason and I will carry a pony along the water path." "No," Mason said firmly. "We stay together. Time grows short." Elena countered. "The poison has nearly reached a pony's heart. If we search separately, we triple our chances of finding the moonflower quickly." Mason looked to Nita, who seemed torn. Finally, she nodded reluctantly. "Elena is right. Grandmother has hours at most." She placed a hand on Mason's arm. "The sacred eagle chose you for a reason. Trust that now." Mason still hesitated. Since entering the canyon, he'd felt increasingly uneasy about Elena's knowledge. Too convenient, too specific for someone who claimed only to have scouted its edges. "There's something you're not telling us," he said to Elena, his voice low but direct. "What is it you really want from this place?" Elena's expression hardened. "My reasons are my own, Mason Reed, but they don't conflict with saving a pony. That I promise." "Not good enough," Mason replied. "Not anymore. Too many lives at stake." For a moment, tension crackled between them. Then Elena sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. "Very well, truth for truth." She pulled back her sleeve, revealing an arm covered in the same blue markings that afflicted a pony, though far less advanced. "I'm dying too. El Cuchillo's favorite method for controlling his wives. I need the moonflower as much as a pony does." The revelation landed like a stone in still water. Nita gasped softly, while Chitan nodded, as if confirming a suspicion. "Why hide this?" Mason demanded. "Because I didn't know if there would be enough for both of us," Elena replied frankly. "I was prepared to give my portion to a pony if necessary. She holds knowledge worth more than my life. But I hoped. I still hope there might be enough for both." Mason studied her, searching for deception and finding only desperate hope. "We go together," he decided, "down the water path, all of us." After rearranging their group, they proceeded down the rightmost tunnel. The passage descended gently, the blue phosphorescence growing brighter as they advanced. Soon, they began to hear the soft sound of lapping water. The tunnel opened into another vast chamber, this one dominated by an underground lake of impossible size. The ceiling soared hundreds of feet above them, perforated by natural shafts that allowed narrow beams of moonlight to pierce the darkness. The beams reflected off the lake's perfectly still surface, creating columns of silvery light that reached from water to ceiling. "The Moon Lake," Elena whispered in awe. The stories were true. They carefully set down a pony's travois near the shore. The old woman's breathing had grown shallow, her skin cold despite the blue glow of poison that now covered most of her visible body. Her eyes, when they fluttered open, seemed to look at something far beyond the cavern. "The veil," she murmured, "so thin now, so thin." "I can see the ancestors waiting. Hold on a little longer," Mason urged, scanning the shoreline for any sign of the moonflower. "We'll find it." They spread out along the W's edge, examining each patch of ground touched by the moonbeams. Minutes passed with mounting frustration and desperation. There, Elena called, suddenly pointing to a small island near the center of the lake. In the strongest moonbeam, Mason squinted in the direction she indicated. In the very center of the island, bathed in the brightest shaft of moonlight, grew a cluster of luminous white flowers. Even at this distance, he could see they were unlike any plant he'd encountered. Their petals seemed to shift between solidity and transparency, as if existing in two states simultaneously. "The moonflowers," he breathed. "Yes." Elena's voice held equal measures of relief and trepidation. Now someone must cross to retrieve them. Mason studied the lake. The water looked deceptively peaceful, its surface mirror smooth in the moonlight. But after their encounter with the water entities, he knew better than to trust appearances. "What's the catch?" he asked. "There's always a catch in this place. The lake marks the boundary between worlds," Seton explained. "Those who enter it see visions, truth, and deception intertwined. Some never find their way back." "I'll go," Nita said immediately. "No." Mason and Elena spoke simultaneously. "I should be the one," Elena insisted. "My poison advances slower if I'm lost. You still have time to find another way." "It has to be me," Mace countered. "The sacred eagle chose me for a reason. This is it." He touched the dulled stone, even faded. "It might offer some protection." Nitika stepped forward, her expression resolute. "Then I go with you." Mason began to object, but the determination in her eyes stopped him. They had come this far together. Perhaps that was the point. No one was meant to walk the boundary alone. Together, he agreed. They prepared quickly, removing boots and unnecessary gear. Mason kept only his knife, the same iron cord blade that had proven effective against the water entities. Nitika retained her bow and last 2 arrows. "If we don't return within an hour," Mason told Elena and Chiton, "get a pony out of here. Find another way." Chiton pressed a small leather pouch into Mason's hand. "For the extraction of the flower's essence," he explained. "The petals must be crushed in a specific sequence. The markings inside will guide you." As they waded into the lake, the water was cold, but not unbearable, reaching only to their waists at its deepest point. Yet with each step, Mason felt a strange resistance, as if walking through something thicker than water. Beside him, Nitika moved with the same deliberate effort, her face set in concentration. Halfway to the island, the sensation intensified, and the air around them seemed to shimmer. Mason's vision blurred, then refocused on a scene that couldn't possibly be there. His father burning his grandmother's medicine bundles, the old woman weeping silently as her heritage turned to ash. He blinked, and the vision changed Ash Creek. The burning tippies, the screams of the dying. Another blink brought Harrington's face twisted with contempt. You chose them over your own kind. Mason. Nita's voice seemed to come from very far away. They're just visions. Keep moving. He turned to her, saw her fighting her own battles as tears streamed down her face. Without thinking, he reached for her hand. Their fingers intertwined, and suddenly the visions receded, still visible, but less overwhelming. Together, he reminded her. Voices began to whisper around them, unintelligible at first, then coalescing into recognizable sounds. His father's stern admonitions, his grandmother's forbidden stories, a pony's prophecy about his choice between worlds. Bridgewalker. The voices whispered blood of two worlds. Choose. Choose now. We're just here for the flowers, Mason replied through clenched teeth. The flowers grow from the boundary. Taking them has a price. Will you pay it, whatever it costs? Nitka answered before Mason could. They're not for us. The voices fell silent. The resistance in the water suddenly vanished, allowing them to move freely again. In moments, they reached the small island and knelt beside the cluster of moonflowers. Up close, the blossoms were even stranger, perfectly white, with 6 petals that seemed to fade in and out of visibility as they caught the moonlight. Their stems were translucent, revealing a glowing blue fluid that pulsed within like a heartbeat. Mason carefully opened Citan's pouch, finding inside a small stone mortar and pestle, along with symbols painted on the leather interior. Following the markings, he harvested 7 blossoms, making sure to cut the stems at specific points. He placed them in the mortar and began grinding them as indicated. The flowers released a luminous blue essence that swirled in the mortar like living mist. Mason continued the process, his hands moving as if guided by an invisible force. When he finished, the mortar contained a glowing blue liquid that seemed to respond to his breathing, swirling faster when he exhaled. We need more, Nitika said, glancing toward the shore where Elena waited beside a pony. For both of them. Mason looked at the remaining flowers, counting quickly. There should be enough. He reached for another 7 blossoms. As his fingers touched the stems, the voices returned louder and more insistent. 2 healings require 2 payments. What will you give in return? Mason hesitated. What do you want? Balance must be maintained. Life for life, power for power, memory for memory. Speak plainly, Nitika demanded. What price? The second healing costs a memory, the most precious one you carry, from each of you freely given. Mason and Nitika exchanged glances. What kind of memory? He asked. That which defines you, shapes you. The memory that made you who you are. A chill ran through Mason that had nothing to do with the water. His most defining memory. There were too many candidates. His grandmother's stories, his father's rejection of her heritage, Ash Creek's horror. Losing any of them would change him fundamentally. Nita seemed to read his thoughts. We have no choice, she said softly. Elena saved my life when she helped me escape El Cuchillo. I owe her this, Mason nodded slowly. How do we give a memory? In response, the water around the island began to glow softly. 2 small whirlpools formed one before each of them. Place your hands in the water. Think of the memory. Let it flow from you. Mason stared at the glowing whirlpool, doubt and fear wearing within him to voluntarily surrender a piece of himself, a foundational memory. It seemed an impossible choice. It's not just for Elena, Nitika reminded him. It's for all the women she's helping, and it honors what you tried to do at Ash Creek. That decided him. Mason plunged his hand into the whirlpool, focusing on his clearest memory of Ash Creek. The moment he turned away, refusing to participate in the massacre, the water grew warmer around his hand, and he felt an odd tugging sensation in his mind, as if someone were gently pulling a thread loose from a tapestry. Beside him, Nita had done the same, her face a mask of concentration as she surrendered whatever memory she had chosen. Tears streamed down her cheeks, though whether from physical pain or emotional loss, Mason couldn't tell. After what seemed an eternity, but was likely only seconds, the tugging sensation stopped. The whirlpools dissipated. Mason withdrew his hand, feeling oddly lighter yet incomplete, as if a room in his mind had been emptied of its furniture, but the room itself remained. "What did you give?" he asked Nitika quietly. She shook her head, looking confused. "I can't remember. Something important," but she trailed off, clearly troubled by the gap in her memory. Mason realized he faced the same paradox. He knew he had surrendered a memory of Ash Creek, but the specifics, the emotions, the details were now a blank space in his mind. He remembered being there, remembered the aftermath, but a crucial piece was simply gone. The price is paid. Take what you came for. Mason harvested the second set of flowers, repeating the extraction process with numb efficiency. When he finished, they had 2 vials of the glowing essence, enough for both Apache and Elena. As they prepared to leave the island, Mason noticed something strange. Where he had cut the flowers, new buds were already forming, growing at an impossible rate. Within moments, they had replaced the harvested blossoms completely. "The boundary renews itself," he murmured. The return journey through the lake proved easier than the approach. The visions were gone, the voices silent, the water merely water. When they reached the shore, they found Apache's condition had worsened dramatically. The blue poison now pulsed visibly beneath her skin, reaching toward her heart. Quickly, Elena urged she crosses over even now. Mason knelt beside Apache, uncoring the first vial of moonflower essence. Following Chitan's instructions, he carefully poured 3 drops onto her tongue, then applied the rest to the center of her chest, directly over her heart. For a terrible moment, nothing happened. Then the blue lines of poison began to retreat, drawn toward the points where the essence had been applied. Apache's body arched suddenly, a gasp escaping her lips, as the poison gathered into a glowing sphere above her heart, growing smaller and fainter until it vanished entirely. Her eyes opened clear and normal once more, free of the eerie blue glow. "Mason Reed," she whispered. "You found the path." Relief washed over him. "Rest now," he said gently. "The poison is gone." Nita handed the second vial to Elena, who administered it to herself with trembling hands. The effect was the same. The blue lines retreated, gathered, and vanished. Color returned to her face. The weight of impending death lifted visibly from her shoulders. "Thank you," she said, looking between Mason and Nita. "What did it cost you?" "We don't exactly remember," Mason replied with a wry smile. "That was part of the price." A distant rumble suddenly shook the chamber dust, and small stones raining from the ceiling. The moonbeams wavered, then steadied. "What was that?" Mason asked, instantly alert. Chaitan's expression grew grave. "The boundary weakens. 2 crossings, 2 healings. The natural order has been disturbed." "We need to leave," Nita said, helping her grandmother to her feet. "Now." Another rumble shook the cavern, stronger this time. Cracks appeared in some of the stone columns, and the lake surface began to ripple ominously. "This way," Elena said, indicating a passage opposite from the one they'd entered. "It should connect with the central tunnel." They hurried through the new passage, supporting a pony between them. The tremors continued at irregular intervals, growing stronger each time. Mason couldn't shake the feeling that something was awakening within the canyon, something ancient and not necessarily benevolent. The connecting passage twisted upward, the blue phosphorescence fading until they were forced to rely on Ellen's single remaining torch. The air grew warmer, carrying the scent of dust, and disturbingly gunpowder. Someone's fired weapons ahead, Mason warned, drawing his revolver. They slowed their pace, moving more cautiously. The passage widened into a modest chamber with 3 exits. In the center of the floor, a dead fire pit contained the remnants of a torch. "Someone passed this way," Elena observed, kneeling by the ashes. Recently, before Mason could respond, a gunshot echoed from the leftmost passage, followed by shouts in Spanish and Apache. "El Cuchillo's men," Elena hissed, her face hardening. They found another entrance, or Harrington forced them to lead the way. Mason countered grimly, "Either way, we need weapons." Elena reached into a hidden pocket in her dress and produced a revolver, checking its chambers. 5 shots. Make them count. Another violent tremor shook the chamber, this one strong enough to send rocks tumbling from the ceiling. In its wake, something changed in the air. A pressure, a sense of spaces overlapping. "What's happening?" Mason asked, fighting a sudden vertigo. "The boundary weakens." A pony replied, her voice steady, despite her physical weakness. "The poison crossed between worlds, and now the moonflower essence has torn the veil further. Realms that should remain separate are bleeding together." More gunshots sounded closer now, accompanied by a woman's defiant shout. "That's Mara," Elena said, already moving toward the sound. "This way." They raced down the leftmost passage, Mason in the lead with his revolver ready. The tunnel opened into a larger cavern where a bizarre scene unfolded in the light of scattered torches. 2 of Elena's women, including one Mason recognized as Mara, stood backed against a wall protected by several Apache men who exchanged fire with El Cuchillo's bandits. But what made the scene truly disturbing was what happened at the edges of the torchlight. Shadows moved independently of those casting them. Patches of air shimmered like heat mirror-gauges, revealing glimpses of other places. A sunlit desert, a starry void, a forest of impossible colors. Through these shimmering tiers in reality, figures were emerging indistinct shapes that seemed to shift between human-animal and something else entirely. "The boundary shatters," Chitan shouted. "We must leave now!" Elucino's men had noticed the apparitions too. Several had stopped firing, their attention divided between the immediate human threat and the incomprehensible phenomena materializing around them. One bandit fired wildly at an approaching shadow, his bullets passing harmlessly through it. The entity surged forward, enveloping the man who screamed once before vanishing completely. Panic spread through the bandits. Some fled deeper into the cavern, while others continued firing desperately at both the Apache defenders and the encroaching shadows. Mason fought his way to Mara's side, using his revolver sparingly, aiming to wound rather than kill when possible. "What happened?" he asked as he reached her. "How did you get here?" "Elucillo captured us while scouting," she gasped, clutching a wound on her arm, "forced us to lead him into the canyon. He thinks there's gold. Where are the others? Some escaped, some—" She shook her head, grief evident in her eyes. Another tremor rocked the cavern larger than any before. A substantial section of ceiling collapsed, crushing 2 bandits and narrowly missing Mason. Through the new opening above, stars were visible in the night sky, their light oddly distorted, as if seen through rippling water. "This place comes apart," Nitika shouted. "We must reach the center chamber." "Which way?" Mason called back, ducking as a bullet ricocheted off the stone near his head. There, Chiton pointed to a narrow fissure in the wall. "It leads upward." They retreated toward the fissure. Mason and the Apache men providing covering fire. Just as they reached it, a commanding voice rang out in Spanish from the main entrance. "Hold your fire, you dogs! I want the women alive!" A tall figure strode into the cavern, seemingly unconcerned by either the gunfire or the supernatural manifestations. Even in the poor light, his presence was commanding. A broad-shouldered man, wearing a mixture of military and bandit attire, a cavalry saber at his hip, and a revolver in each hand. A livid scar marked his left shoulder exactly where Nitika had said she'd put an arrow 2 years before. "Elucho," Elena whispered, her voice cold with hatred. The bandit leader surveyed the chaotic scene, his eyes narrowing when he spotted Elena. "Traitorous bitch," he snarled. "Did you think I wouldn't follow you, that I wouldn't know exactly what you planned?" Elena raised her chin defiantly. "Your reign ends here, butcher." El Cuchillo laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "In this place of demons, I think not. The soldiers follow close behind me. Your precious army lieutenant and his men. I merely arrive first to claim my prize." His gaze shifted to a pony, surprise registering at her recovered state. The old witch still alive? Impressive. Her secrets will fetch an even higher price from the army man. While he spoke, Mason counted the bandits, 8 remaining plus El Cuchillo himself. Not impossible odds, except for the shadow creatures that continued to materialize around the cavern's edges and the increasingly violent tremors. A massive tremor shook the cavern, more violent than any before. A large section of ceiling collapsed between them and the bandits, crushing 2 of El Cuchillo's men and cutting off his advance. Now Chitan shouted. They scrambled through the narrow fissure, the Apache men bringing up the rear. Behind them, El Cuchillo's enraged shouts competed with the rumble of falling stone and the unearthly keening of the shadow entities. The fissure angled steeply upward, forcing them to climb rather than walk. Mason helped a pony who, despite the moonflower's healing, remained physically weak. Nitika led the way, moving with the sure-footed grace that still amazed Mason. "The center chamber should be just ahead," Chitan called from behind them, "where the 3 tunnels meet again." "What exactly are we looking for?" Mason asked, helping a pony over a particularly difficult section. "The hearthstone," a pony replied. "A natural formation at the canyon center where all boundaries converge. If we can reach it, I may be able to repair what we've damaged." After what felt like hours, but was likely only minutes of difficult climbing, they emerged into a vast circular chamber, unlike any they'd seen before. The ceiling soared hundreds of feet above, opening to the night sky, where stars blazed with unnatural brightness. The walls were smooth, almost polished, and carved with symbols from dozens of tribal traditions. In the center stood a single column of red stone flecked with what appeared to be gold and turquoise. It pulsed with a faint light that matched the rhythm of a heartbeat. "The heart stone," a pony breathed. But they weren't alone. Around the chamber's perimeter, more shadow creatures had materialized, some fully formed, now resembling animals and humans, but with disturbing differences. Their eyes glowed with the same blue light as the poison, their movements jerky and wrong. "Keep them back," Chitan instructed the Apache men. "A pony must reach the hearthstone." Elena and her people formed a protective circle, weapons ready. The shadow creatures paced, but didn't immediately attack, as if held back by some invisible barrier centered on the stone column. "How much time do we have?" Mason asked, noticing that the tremors continued to intensify. "Minutes at most," Citan replied grimly. The boundaries weakened with each passing moment. They approached the hearthstone cautiously. Up close, Mason could see that what he'd taken for gold and turquoise were actually tiny symbols etched into the stone and filled with precious materials. They formed spiraling patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. Aponi placed her hands on the stone, closing her eyes in concentration. "I need blood," she said without opening her eyes. "Blood of two worlds to repair what blood of two worlds has damaged." Mason understood immediately. "Mine." Aponi nodded. "And Nita's, the Cherokee, and Apache together." Mason drew his knife, making a small cut across his palm without hesitation. Nitika did the same, her eyes meeting his with a shared determination. "Place your bleeding hands on the stone," Aponi instructed, "one on either side of mine." As they complied, Aponi began to chant in Apache, her voice growing stronger with each word. The hearthstone's pulsing increased in tempo, its light intensifying from a gentle glow to a bright radiance that cast their shadows sharply against the chamber walls. The shadow creatures grew agitated, pacing faster, some attempting to approach, but recoiling as if burned when they neared the expanding circle of light. The tremors slowed, then stopped altogether, replaced by a deep humming that vibrated through the stone beneath their feet. Mason felt a strange sensation where his bleeding palm pressed against the hearthstone, a pulling, as if the stone drew something from him beyond just blood. Images flashed through his mind. His grandmother singing in Cherokee, his father burning her medicine bundles. The guardians pulled the Moonflower Island. Faster and faster, the images came bleeding into one another until they became a continuous stream of sensation. Beside him, Nitika gasped, clearly experiencing something similar. Her free hand found his arm gripping tightly, as if to anchor herself. The hearthstone's light suddenly flared blindingly bright. Mason instinctively closed his eyes, but the light penetrated even closed eyelids. For a moment, that seemed to stretch into eternity, he felt suspended between worlds, aware of multiple realities layered upon one another like transparent sheets. He sensed presences moving between these layers, some benevolent, others decidedly not all connected by pathways invisible to ordinary sight. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the light receded, the humming stopped. Mason opened his eyes to find the chamber transformed. The shadow creatures had vanished. The tears in reality had sealed. The hearthstone pulsed with a steady, gentle rhythm once more. "It is done," Aponi said, removing her hands from the stone. "The boundary is restored." Mason and Nitika followed suit, examining their palms. The cuts had healed completely, leaving only thin white scars in the shape of the symbols that had been etched into the hearthstone. "What happened?" Mason asked, still disoriented from the experience. "The canyon accepted our offering," Aponi explained, blood freely, given his powerful medicine. It remembered the proper order of things. A commotion at one of the chamber entrances interrupted them. Elena's people raised their weapons as footsteps approached, many footsteps accompanied by the distinctive sound of military boots. "Harrington," Mason said grimly, drawing his revolver despite knowing they were vastly outnumbered. But it was El Cuchillo who emerged first, his fine clothes now torn and dusty blood streaming from a cut on his forehead. Behind him came not just his remaining bandits, but a mixed group of soldiers, all with weapons drawn. And at their head walked Lieutenant Harrington, his uniform immaculate, despite the circumstances, his expression one of controlled anger. Beside him stood a portly, expensively dressed man. Mason didn't recognize Governor Carson, he presumed. "Mason Reed," Harrington said, ignoring El Cuchillo entirely. "You've led me on quite a chase." Mason kept his revolver steady. "It's over, Harrington. Whatever you hope to find here is beyond your reach." The lieutenant's mouth curved in an unpleasant smile. "Is it, I see? The old woman stands healed. The Moonflower exists. Then if one secret of this canyon is real, others must be as well. The only secret you'll find here is death, Nita warned. The canyon does not welcome those who come with greed in their hearts. Brave words from a savage Harrington replied dismissively. He gestured to his men. Secure them all. The governor will want to speak with them personally. As the soldiers moved to obey, a new tremor shook the chamber, different from before, more focused. The hearthstone's glow intensified briefly, then returned to normal. Harrington's men hesitated, looking around nervously. Now Lieutenant Carson commanded, pushing forward. Secure the old woman and her knowledge before something else happens. But as the first soldier approached a pony, the hearthstone pulsed again, and a shimmering curtain of light expanded outward from it, passing through everyone in the chamber like a wave. When it reached the walls, it dissipated. For a moment, nothing seemed to have changed. Then Mason noticed something odd. Harrington was staring at his hands in horror. Where once had been human flesh was now blue-tinted translucent, revealing bones and vessels beneath. The lieutenant wasn't alone. Carson and his soldiers were similarly transformed, their bodies becoming increasingly transparent, blue light glowing from within them. "What's happening?" Carson screamed, holding up hands through which the hearthstone was clearly visible. "The boundary judges," Apache said calmly. "Those who would steal its power find themselves caught between worlds, neither fully here nor there." Harrington staggered toward Mason, reaching out with a hand that seemed to phase in and out of visibility. "Help me," he gasped. "We were friends once." Mason stepped back, a complex mixture of emotions washing through him, pity, revulsion, and a deep sadness for what might have been. "I can't help you, Luke. The canyon has made its choice." "No," Harrington's desperate cry echoed as his form grew fainter. "I won't die here. Not like this." Carson and the soldiers were experiencing the same fate, their bodies becoming less substantial with each passing moment. The governor fell to his knees, clawing at the stone floor, with hands that could no longer touch physical matter. "The gold," he babbled. "Where is the gold I was promised?" His words cut off as he faded completely from view, leaving only a faint blue mist that dissipated seconds later. One by one, Harrington's men met the same fate, their expressions of terror the last thing to vanish. Harrington himself fought the longest, his iron will extending his transition. "This isn't over, Mason." He rasped, his voice distorted, as if coming from a great distance. "I'll find a way back. I always do." Then he too was gone, leaving nothing behind to indicate he had ever existed. El Cuchillo, who had watched the soldiers' fate with growing horror, fell to his knees before Elena. "Mercy," he begged, all his arrogance gone. "I don't want to fade." Curiously, neither El Cuchillo nor his men had been affected by the hearthstone's judgment. They remained solid, untouched by the blue transformation. Why weren't they taken? "Too," Mason asked Apache. "The boundary judges intentions, not actions alone," she explained. "These men are criminals, murderers even, but they sought physical treasure, not the power of the boundary itself. That makes their transgression lesser." Elena stood over the kneeling El Cuchillo, her expression conflicted. "Years I dreamed of this moment," she said softly, "of seeing you broken, begging for the mercy you never showed others. I'll give you anything," El Cuchillo promised desperately. "Gold land, my men, they're yours to command." Elena looked to Nita. "What would you do, cousin, you who tracked him for weeks after he took us? You who still bear his knife's mark on your arm?" Nitika studied the bandit leader silently. "Death would be too simple," she finally said. "Let him live with his defeat. Let him know that women he thought to break were stronger than he could ever be." El Cuchillo sagged with relief. "Thank you. I swear I'll." But Nita continued coldly. he should not leave unmarked. She drew her knife and approached him. Hold him. Elena's warriors seized the bandit leader, who struggled briefly before submitting. Nitika carefully, deliberately cut a small symbol into his cheek, the same mark that now scarred Mason's and her palms. The boundaries sign, she told him, so all who know the old ways will recognize you as one who violated sacred ground and was judged wanting. No tribe will shelter you. No medicine person will heal you. You walk alone now. Blood dripped down El Cuchillo's face. But the fight had gone out of him. When Elena's warriors released him, he remained kneeling, head bowed. Take your men and go, Elena commanded. If I ever see you again, I will not be so merciful. The bandits needed no further encouragement. They fled through the passage they had entered, from half carrying their broken leader. When they had gone, a heavy silence fell over the chamber. The events of the past hours seemed to catch up with everyone at once. Elena's people leaned on each other, tending to wounds. Saitan sat heavily on a stone, suddenly looking every one of his many years. A pony stood by the hearthstone, her fingers lightly tracing its symbols. Mason found himself beside Nitika, both of them gazing at the thin white scars on their palms. Will these fade? He asked. She shook her head. The boundary has marked us as its own. We are changed, Mason Reed. We walked between worlds and returned. Few can claim such a journey. What does it mean for us? He asked the question encompassing far more than just the scars. Nita's eyes met his, her usual reserve softened by all they had experienced together. It means we have choices to make, paths to walk, but we need not decide everything this night. Mason nodded, feeling the weight of the past days, the fear, the wonder, the losses and discoveries settling on him like a physical burden. He was exhausted beyond measure, yet strangely at peace. Whatever came next, he had found something he hadn't known. He was seeking a place to belong, even if that place was the boundary between worlds. Let's get everyone out of here, he said. We can figure out the rest under the open sky. Dawn painted the Arizona desert in hues of gold and crimson as they emerged from the canyon's hidden entrance. The air was cool, sweet, with the scent of sage after a night's dew. Eagles circled in the brightening sky, 3 of them riding thermals with effortless grace. Sacred messengers, Sheetan remarked, watching their flight. They honor your journey. Mason's dulled turquoise stone stirred briefly with warmth at the sight of the birds, a faint echo of its former power. He smiled, understanding that some connections remained unbroken. They made camp a mile from the canyon's entrance, too exhausted to travel further without rest. Elena's surviving people constructed simple shelters while Chatan prepared food. A pony sat with her face turned toward the rising sun, absorbing its warmth. Mason found himself standing slightly apart, watching the activity with a strange sense of detachment. So much had happened in the span of a week from his solitary existence to this moment, surrounded by people whose lives had become inexplicably intertwined with his own. The boundary between his Cherokee and white heritage, once so rigid in his mind, had blurred just as the boundaries between worlds had in the canyon. Yet the memory he had sacrificed at the Moonflower Island left a hollow space that troubled him. What crucial piece of himself had he surrendered? How had it changed who he was? A presence beside him drew him from his thoughts. Nita offered a cup of coffee, which he accepted gratefully. "You're thinking too hard," she observed. "I can see it in your eyes." "Trying to remember what I can't," Mason admitted, wondering how it's changed me. Nita nodded in understanding. "I feel it too. The empty space where something important once lived." She looked down at the scar on her palm. But perhaps that's the nature of all journeys. We leave parts of ourselves behind.
Make room for something new.
What will you do now? Mason asked after a moment.
Return to your people.
Nitika considered the question, her gaze drifting to where a pony sat. Eventually, grandmother must pass her remaining knowledge to me, especially now that half the rain ceremony is lost. A shadow crossed her face briefly. But first I would see Elena and the other women safely established somewhere. They cannot return to their old lives. And you, Nitka asked, will you resume your wandering? Mason looked down at his scarred palm, then at the dulled turquoise stone. No, he said. That path is closed to me now. He hesitated, then added with rare vulnerability, but I'm not sure what opens in its place. Perhaps that's something we discover by walking it. Nita suggested, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. Across the camp, a pony approached them with the steady grace that had returned to her movements after the moonflower's healing. The canyon's blessing does not end at its borders, she said without preamble. What you learned there, what you became there, travels with you. And what exactly did we become? Mason asked. A pony studied him thoughtfully. In the old days, there were those who walked between tribes as messengers, healers, story keepers. They belonged nowhere and everywhere, trusted, because they stood outside tribal conflicts. She gestured to their scarred palms. The boundary has marked you both for such a role, I think. Not bound to one people, but to something larger. That sounds lonely, Mason admitted, voicing his deepest fear. It can be, a pony acknowledged, but it need not be solitary. Her meaning was clear, though tactfully indirect. The path between worlds is wide enough for two to walk side by side. Mason glanced at Nika, whose eyes remained fixed on the distant horizon, though a faint color had risen in her cheeks. A pony smiled knowingly. I will rest now. The journey has tired me more than I care to admit. She touched both their shoulders briefly before walking away, leaving them in a charged silence. Your grandmother is not subtle, Mason finally said, a smile tugging at his lips. No, Nitika agreed, meeting his eyes at last. Subtlety has never been her strength. She set down her coffee cup. She is right about one thing, though. Whatever path opens before us now, it would be easier walk together than alone. Is that a proposal, Nitika? Mason asked, only half joking. It is a recognition, she replied seriously. Few would understand what we experienced in the canyon. Few would believe it even. That creates a bond, whether we choose it or not. Mason nodded slowly. I suppose it does. By midday, Elena and her group had prepared to depart, heading south toward a mission near the border where women like them could find sanctuary. Mason helped them gather supplies for the journey. What will you do after the mission? He asked Elena as they worked. Build something new, she replied simply. Maybe a place for others who have escaped men like El Cuchillo, a sanctuary of our own making. She paused, studying him with newfound respect. And you, will you go with Nita to her people? Mason looked across the camp where Nitika sat with a pony deep in conversation. I don't know yet. Their world isn't mine. Not entirely. Nor is the white world Elena observed. Perhaps that's your strength, not your weakness. Standing between you can see what others cannot. The insight struck Mason deeply. He had spent his life trying to deny half his heritage to fit completely into one world or the other. Perhaps his grandmother had been right all along. His mixed blood wasn't a curse, but a gift. If only he could learn to embrace it. The boundary mark isn't a burden, Elena continued, touching the symbol now etched permanently into Mason's palm. It's a reminder that some of us are meant to be bridges. As Elena's group departed, Mason found himself beside Chaitan, both watching the figures grow smaller against the desert landscape. "She is wise beyond her years," the old man observed. "She survived hell," Mason replied. "That tends to bring clarity." Seton nodded sagely. As you have in your own way, he touched the dulled turquoise stone at Mason's neck. "The sacred eagle's purpose is fulfilled, yet you still wear it." "Feels wrong to take it off," Mason admitted, "like it's become part of me." "It has," Chaitan agreed. "Just as the boundary mark, just as your Cherokee blood, all pieces of the whole." He looked at Mason with those penetrating eyes that seemed to see beyond surface appearances. "Do you regret the path you've walked?" Mason considered the question carefully. 1 week ago, he had been a solitary drifter with no ties, no future beyond the next town, a man running from his past and denying half his heritage. Now, he stood marked by the boundary, missing a memory he couldn't recall, connected to people in ways he was only beginning to understand. "No," he finally said. "Whatever I lost along the way, I found something more valuable." "And what is that?" Mason looked to where Nita stood watching the sunset, her profile etched against the crimson sky. "A purpose, a place to belong, even if that place isn't a fixed point on any map." Saitan smiled, clapping Mason on the shoulder. "Then the sacred eagle chose well indeed." That evening, as they sat around the campfire beneath a sky ablaze with stars, Saitan produced a small leather pouch. From it, he withdrew a pinch of herbs, which he cast into the flames. The fire flared blue momentarily, releasing a sweet, unfamiliar scent. "A offering of thanks," he explained to Mason, "for the ancestors who guided our steps, and for those who walked between." A pony added her gaze, moving between Mason and Nitika. Later, as the others slept, Mason stood at the edge of camp, looking back toward the canyon of shadows. In the moonlight, the distant rock formations resembled sleeping giants, ancient guardians of secrets few would ever comprehend. Soft footsteps announced Nitika's approach. She stood beside him, following his gaze. "Do you regret it?" she asked quietly. "Getting involved in all this?" "No," Mason replied without hesitation. "A week ago, I was running from half of who I am. Now," he looked down at his scarred palm, "now I'm beginning to understand there's strength in being both, in standing between." Nitika nodded, understanding in her eyes. "The boundary is not just a place, but a way of seeing the world, recognizing that most important things exist in the spaces between simple categories." Impulsively, Mason reached out, taking her scarred hand in his, their palms pressed together, the identical boundary marks aligning perfectly. "Whatever comes next," he said, "I'm glad I won't face it alone." Nita's fingers intertwined with his, the gesture more intimate than any words. "You never were Mason Reed. Not from the moment Seton placed the sacred eagle around your neck. Some paths we only think we walk alone." Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the small dramas that played out beneath them. But for those who knew how to look, who had glimpsed the boundaries between worlds, those same stars formed pathways, bridges between what was and what could be. Mason and Nitika stood together at that threshold, their joined hands forming the simplest and most profound bridge of all, the one between two hearts that had found in each other something long sought but never expected. The turquoise stone pulsed once with warmth against Mason's chest, not an echo of its former power, but a beginning of something new. His own power awakened at last. The path forward was unclear, unpredictable, potentially dangerous. But for the first time in years, Mason Reed welcomed the dawn with something he had all but forgotten. HB.